The last thing I see from my old life is my client's face, not a pretty face. Puffy, red-veined nose, eyes that belong to a man who has just figured out he's been played. We're sitting in a cafe. I've just finished explaining why his investment in a highly promising residential complex evaporated along with the paperwork, and he's staring at me with that specific look. The slow dawn of understanding. Then something seizes in my chest. Then darkness. Then dirt. I'm on the ground, not pavements. Actual ground with grass and stones pressing into my back. The air smells like horses and dust and something earthy I can't name. My hands are in front of my face because apparently that's what my hands decided to do on their own. They are not my hands. I mean, they look like mine's. Same fingers, same general shape, but the knuckles are cracked. The skin is rough. There's dirt jammed under every nail in a way that suggests it's been there for weeks. I have never worked with my hands in my life. I have always paid other people to work with theirs. First thought, someone kidnapped me and drugged me. I look at the hands longer. Second thought, these are not my hands. Third thought, the useful one. Calm down. Panic is for victims. I am not a victim. Figure out what's happening. I sit up. The world tilts, then settles. The clothes on my body are torn and smell like someone used them as a blanket under a bridge. Not for one night, but as a long-term arrangement. There's a hole in the pocket where coins presumably used to be. 3 remain, small, unfamiliar metal, stamped with a face I don't recognize. I look around. A road, dense forest on both sides. No cars, no power lines, no asphalt. The trees are enormous and untouched. The air is so clean it's almost offensive. I wasn't built for air this clean. At the edge of the road, deep wheel ruts cut through the mud. They lead straight to a cliff edge and stop. I walk over and look down, 20 meters, maybe more at the bottom, a shattered carriage. 2 horses dead, 4 people scattered in the wreckage. Nobody moves. I climb down, not because I want to look at dead bodies on my first confused morning, and whatever this is, because an operator without information is just a confused man standing in the woods. And I refuse to be that. Carriage is mostly splinters. One large trunk survived the fall. Wedged between rocks. Cracked but intact. I pry it open. Clothes. Clean ones. A coat. Trousers. Boots. A vest with a symbol embroidered on the chest. 2 snakes curled around a staff. I've seen that symbol before. Medical. Every civilization apparently lands on the same logo. Next to the trunk, a leather bag. I unbuckle it. Inside, a wooden tube with a flared end, a stethoscope, sort of the kind you'd see in a museum, bronze forceps with ornate handles, rolls of clean linen bandaging, small glass vials stoppered with wax, a folding tool with a blade so thin it must be for something precise. Everything is handmade, everything is old-fashioned, but clearly functional, clearly used, clearly belonging to someone who knew what they were doing. No papers with a name, no documents, no letters, no identification of any kind, just tools and clothes and a dead man at the bottom of a cliff. I find the dead man near the front of the wreckage. He is face up, eyes open, and he looks exactly like me. I crouch next to him for a long moment, same jaw, same nose, same general architecture of the face. He's cleaned up where I am dirty, better fed where I am thin, but the resemblance is not a coincidence. In my old line of work, I've used fake IDs, borrowed identities, played characters I built from scratch. I know what it feels like when a role fits. This one fits. I look at the medical bags. I look at the vest with the snake staff emblem. I look at the road that leads somewhere. A city, probably, given that someone built a road here. And I think about what happens if I walk into that city looking like a beggar who just crawled out of a ditch. Then I think about what happens if I walk in looking like a doctor. The decision takes about 4 seconds. I change behind the wreckage out of basic respect for the dead man, even though he is past caring. The boots are slightly too large. The trousers fit. The shirt is clean and smells like cedar. Then I pick up the coat. The coat has buttons, not normal buttons. Elaborate, looping, braided cord buttons that fasten through cloth loops in a system that appears to have been designed by someone who actively hated the person wearing it. I stand there working through the logic of the top button for what feels like a reasonable amount of time. 7 minutes later, I'm fully dressed. I sling the medical bag over my shoulder, take one last look at the wreckage, and start walking toward the city. My name is Christopher. I died, apparently, during a real estate con in a world with electricity and smartphones. I woke up in the body of a beggar in a world with horses and hand-stitched buttonholes. The man who actually owned this coat and these instruments is dead at the bottom of a cliff. Nobody here knows his name. Nobody left a single document. Which means the name Dr. Christopher belongs to whoever decides to use it. I've built entire companies out of less I walk for about 20 minutes before the city walls appear through the trees. Stone solid with a gate and guards and a crowd moving in and out. People with carts and animals in baskets. A functioning, populated medieval city that has never heard of antibiotics, sterile technique, or informed consent. I straighten my coat. Check that the medical emblem is visible on the vest. Somewhere behind me, an actual doctor is dead in a ravine. Somewhere in front of me, a city full of sick people is waiting. I have the coat. I have the bag. I have a medical education consisting of 1 semester of biology in high school. Several episodes of a hospital drama I watched while running a pension fund scam in 2019. And the general knowledge that you're supposed to wash your hands. In my old world, that would be fraud. I walk through the gate here apparently. It's a career. The city gate opens into a market street, and the first thing that happens is a woman carrying a basket of turnips. Stops, looks at me, and bows her head. I keep walking. She must be bowing at someone behind me. A cart driver sees me from his seat and nods respectfully, touching the brim of his hat. A pair of men haggling over something at a stall pause mid-argument to glance my way and straighten up slightly. I stop and look behind me. Nobody there, just the gate and the road I came from. They're bowing at me. I have spent my entire adult life engineering situations where people trust me, respect me, hand me money, but it always required preparation. Research, a tailored story, the right clothes, the right setting. It took work. This is just happening because of a coat, because of a symbol on a vest. I file this information away and keep walking. I make it about 40 meters into the city before a man comes at me from the side at a speed that suggests catastrophe. He's maybe 50, short, round in the middle, with a mustache so aggressively groomed it seems to be operating independently from the rest of his face. He's wearing a dark coat with ink stains on the sleeve, and he is already talking before he reaches me. Doctor, Christopher, thank the saints. We expected you 2 hours ago. The staff has been waiting since midday. I've had to apologize to the aldermen twice already. The supply inventory hasn't been signed. The admission register needs your seal. And there's the matter of the Eastern Ward allocation, which I mentioned in my letter of the 14th. He stops, looks at my coat, then at my face, then at the medical bag. You are Dr. Christopher, he says. It's not entirely a question, I am, I say. And you are Edmund Paris, hospital administrator. He says this like I should already know it, probably because he mentioned it in the letter of the 14th, which I have not read because I didn't exist until this morning. The road was difficult. Terrible, I say. I'm exhausted. Show me the facility. This works perfectly. Edmund pivots on his heel and leads me forward at a pace that suggests he's been waiting to show someone this building for years. He talks the entire way. Dates, names, staffing numbers, supply contracts, a dispute with a local herbalist, the aldermen's opinions on medical licensing, the correct protagonist call for recording deaths versus recoveries. I nod at everything I say, and I see and will address that at intervals that seem to satisfy him. What I'm actually doing is looking at the street, the people, the clothes, the buildings, the carts. Trying to understand what kind of world this is and how much trouble I'm in. The hospital is a 2-story stone building on a side street, newer than most of what surrounds it, with a painted sign above the door showing the same snake and staff symbol as my vest. Edmund opens the door with visible pride. Inside, 4 rooms on the ground floor, 8 beds total, 2 small windows per room, clean enough stone floors. A fireplace in the corner of the largest room with a pot of something simmering over it. Edmund leads me to a side room that appears to be the examination area. He gestures at the equipment arranged on a wooden table like it's a presentation. I look at it. There's a wooden tube about 30 centimeters long flared at one end, a monoroll stethoscope, the kind from the 1800s, the kind I've only seen in paintings. Bronze forceps, 2 sizes, a set of small iron weights on a scale for measuring herbs, a ceramic bowl and pestle, a leather roll containing needles of varying thickness, something that might be a tongue depressor if you were feeling generous about the definition. The equipment, says Edmund, watching my face carefully, fully stocked as requested. I pick up the wooden tube, turn it over, set it down. It requires some refinement, I say, in the tone of a man who has opinions. Edmund writes something in his ledger. I take a slow walk around the table, examining each item with an expression I hope reads as professional assessment rather than complete bewilderment. The needles are fine. The scale is functional. The forceps are solid bronze and well-made. There's a row of small ceramic jars along the shelf, each labeled in a script I can mostly read. Willow bark, chamomile, garlic, something called yellow root that I don't recognize. Garlic, good. I know what garlic does, that's one. I'll need time to review the inventory properly, I tell Edmund after I've rested. The road was genuinely terrible. Of course, he's already writing. I'll have the evening meal brought to your quarters. Second floor, the room at the end of the corridor. It's the largest one I made sure of. The front door opens. A large man comes in half carrying another large man, who is holding his right leg at an angle and making a sound between a grunt and a sustained complaint. Behind them, a woman, wife probably, who looks like she's been crying for several hours. Is the doctor here? The carrying man says. They said the new doctor arrived. Edmund looks at me. I look at the patient's ankle. It's swollen, definitely swollen. Puffy along the outside edge. Bruised purple-yellow already spreading down toward the foot. The man is holding it carefully, not putting weight on it. Bring him here, I say. They get him onto the examination table. I crouch down and look at the ankle properly. I press along the bone. The man hisses. But it's pain from pressure, not the specific sharp response of a fracture. I rotate the foot slowly. It moves. Not freely, not without pain, but it moves through the full range of motion. This is a sprain. A bad one. Maybe a partial tear of the ligament. But the bone is intact. Who looked at this before, I ask. Healerwort, the carrying man says. He said the bone is broken. Said it needs to come off before the rot sets in. We paid him already. He's coming tomorrow morning with his. The bone is not broken. I say, silent, press here. I guide the man's own hand to the spot along the ankle bone. Do you feel that? That's the bone. It's whole. What you have is a torn ligament. The joint twisted. The tissue stretched. But the structure is intact. The patient stares at his own ankle. So I keep the leg. You keep the leg. His wife makes a sound like air leaving a very large balloon. I manipulate the joint carefully. There's a technique to reducing a bad sprain, getting the swelling to shift, repositioning the tissue. I learned it from a sports medicine video I watched once because I'd sprained my own ankle running from a client's angry brother, which is a story for another time. The man grips the edge of the table and swears through his teeth, and then something shifts and settles and he goes quiet. Try to stand, I say. He stands, puts weight on it experimentally. His eyes go wide. It still hurts, he says, like he's surprised hurting is an option, but I'm standing. It'll hurt for 2 weeks. Keep it wrapped. Keep it elevated when you sleep. Don't run on it. Come back if the swelling gets worse instead of better. He walks to the door slowly, carefully, but he walks. He steps outside onto the street, and I hear him from the doorway. He fixed it. The new doctor fixed it without cutting anything off. The new doctor is a miracle worker. Within 4 minutes, there are 9 people standing outside the building. I close the door. Edmund is looking at me with an expression caught somewhere between relief and religious awe. Then his expression changes to something more complicated. Doctor, he says slowly, Healer Ward is going to be very unhappy. He already collected the deposit for tomorrow's procedure. That's between him and the patient, I say. As if on cue, the door opens again. A thin man in a gray coat storms in, angular face, sharp eyes, the energy of someone who has been doing a thing a certain way for a long time and does not appreciate interference. He looks at the patient, who is standing in the doorway demonstrating his intact ankle to the gathering crowd, and then he looks at me. Who are you, he says, to overturn a proper diagnosis? The doctor, I say. I am the healer of this district. I have practiced for 22 years. That ankle has a broken bone. The bone must be removed before the rot. The bone is not broken, I say. I pressed it. I rotated the joints. The bone is intact. If you had pressed it before deciding to amputate, you would have known this. The technique in the great text clearly states that swelling of that severity, your technique nearly cost this man his leg. I say it flatly, no heat in it. The way you state a fact about the weather, he has a sprained ankle, he is walking, he will continue to walk. I don't know what your great texts say, but I would suggest reading them more carefully. I want that to be a factor in the pricing conversation. Edmund looks at me for a long moment. Then he writes the number in his ledger. That night I sit in the room at the end of the corridor with a candle and 2 medical books from the shelf downstairs. The first one is called A Complete Treatise on the Humors and Their Governing of Bodily Health. I open it to a random page. When the black bile rises in excess above the station of the yellow bile, the patient will present with heaviness of the eyelid and foulness of the breath, indicating a corruption of the liver's spiritual fire, which must be drawn out through the heel or the inside of the elbow, taking care not to exceed 3 measures lest the vital spirit. I close the book. The second one is thinner, hand-copied, not printed. Someone's personal notes, plant drawings, dosage observations, a few sketches of anatomy that are mostly correct if you squint. This one is more useful. I read for an hour, then I blow out the candle. Good thing, I say to the dark room, that I won't be relying on any of that. Outside, the city is quiet. Tomorrow there will be a line at the door. I'm almost certain of it. I was right about the lines. It stretches from the hospital door to the end of the street and then bends around the corner. Edmund is standing outside counting heads with the expression of a man who has prayed for something his entire life and is now terrified. It actually showed up. There are 43 people, he tells me when I step outside. Then we'd better start, I say. He stares at me. Doctor, there are 43 people. Edmund, I can see them, I go inside. He follows, we start. The first patient of the morning is a large man. Not tall large, wide large. The kind of wide that happens when a person has spent many years being very serious about meals. He lowers himself onto the examination bench with the careful movement of someone whose stomach precedes him into every room, and he looks at me with the eyes of a man who has suffered. 2 weeks, he says, pressing both hands against his abdomen. 2 weeks of this bloating pain wind that could flatten a candle at 3 paces. I can't sleep. My wife has moved to a separate room. My horse won't stand near me. What did the healer prescribe? Ox bile 3 times a day mixed with river water. I look at him. Ox bile? He said it would balance my humors. I write nothing down because I have no idea what I'm writing. What have you been eating? He brightens slightly, like this is finally a question he can answer well. Fatty pork in the mornings. Beer with the noon meal. Smoked mutton in the afternoon. Beer with supper. Sometimes a second beer after supper if the first one went down nicely. Salted lard on bread in the evenings. Smoked. I understand, I say. Stop. He stops. I think about this for approximately 2 seconds. My grandmother, my actual grandmother in the life I apparently no longer have, used to say that a stomach in revolt wants 2 things, heat and emptiness. Hot water with ginger, no grease, no meat, let the whole system settle down. She was a woman who had raised 6 children and trusted no doctors, and in my experience she was right about most things. Hot water with ginger root, 3 times a day, no meat for 3 days, no beer for 3 days, no salt at anything. He stares at me. That's it. That's it. The healer gave me ox bile. I'm aware of what the healer gave you. How's that working out? He has no answer for this. He leaves looking skeptical. 2 days later, he comes back. He walks in while I'm examining someone else, stands in the doorway and announces to the entire waiting room the pain is completely gone. Completely? I slept like a stone. My wife came back to the bedroom. He points at me. This man is the finest physician in the province. The waiting room applauds. Privately, I think, my grandmother should have had the title. She figured this out 40 years ago without a medical degree. 20 minutes later, Healer Ward, the same man who tried to amputate yesterday's ankle, walks through the door. Not as a patient, he stands in the middle of the room with his arms crossed and speaks loudly enough for everyone to hear. Hot water with ginger root, he says, like he's presenting evidence at a trial. That is the treatment being offered in this hospital. Hot water and ginger. That is not medicine. That is what a peasant woman gives her child. This man is a fraud, and the people of this city deserve to know. What do you prescribe for bloating, I ask. He pauses. Ox bile to rebalance. He drank your ox bile for 2 weeks, I say. The pain didn't improve. He came here, I gave him hot water and ginger. The pain was gone in 2 days. I'm not telling you ox bile is wrong. I'm telling you that in this particular case, hot water and ginger worked and ox bile didn't. I let that sit for a moment. How are your other patients doing? Word opens his mouth, closes it. If any of them need a second opinion, I say my door is open. He leaves. The waiting room is very quiet for a moment. Then someone near the back starts clapping and everyone joins in. Edmund, standing in the corner with his ledger, writes something with the careful focus of a man who doesn't want anyone to see him smiling. The woman who comes in after the large man has been holding her head in both hands since before she sat down. 1 week, she says, every day, both temples, sometimes behind the eyes. I run through the obvious questions. Any falls? No. Any fever? No. Any changes in? And here I realize I have to improvise the vocabulary in the household routine. Not really. How much water do you drink in a day? She thinks. This should not require thought. Well, soup. Mostly at meals. Water. Plain waters. Not soup. She thinks harder. Sometimes if I'm thirsty. How often are you thirsty? Not often. I look at her. She looks back. She is, by any reasonable assessment, simply dehydrated. Every mornings. Every day. Probably for years. 2 full jugs of water every day. Drink 1 in the morning before you eat anything. Stop adding salt to your food. She squints at me. That will fix my head. Come back in 2 days if it doesn't. She leaves looking unconvinced. The next morning her husband arrives carrying a pie. An entire pie. He holds it out to me with both hands like an offering. Her head is completely better, he says. She woke up this morning and said it was the first morning in a week she didn't want to die. What did you give her? An ancient remedy. I say I take the pie. It's a good pie. Edmund gets half. The mother comes in at a run, child in arms, hair flying. He's burning up. He won't eat. The spirit healer said evil spirits have taken root in his chest. And we have to fast for 3 days and bathe him in cold water every morning. And put him on the bench. I look at the boy, 7 maybe 8 years old, face flushed, eyes glassy. I press my fingers gently to the sides of his throat, swollen lymph nodes. I take the wooden stethoscope tube and press it to his chest the way I've seen done. I open his mouth and look at his throat. Red, inflamed. A straightforward upper respiratory infection. It's not spirits, I say. It's a throat illness. It will pass. The healer said. The healer wants to fast the child and bathe him in cold water. The child has a fever. Cold baths will make the fever worse. Fasting will make him too weak to fight the illness. I keep my voice even. She's not the problem here, she's just a mother who got bad advice. Warm drinks, honey, and water as much as he'll take. A damp cloth on his forehead, warm, not cold. He stays in bed, he stays warm, and he eats whatever he can manage. She stares at me. That's all. That's all. What about the spirits? I pause. I think about this. In my old world, I would have told her spirits don't exist, and that would have been both true and completely useless. Here, I'm not sure what the rules are. What I'm sure of is that I need her to follow the actual instructions. The spirits, I say carefully, will leave when the illness leaves. Give them no reason to stay. Keep him warm, keep him drinking, and they'll move on. She nods like this makes perfect sense. She takes her son home. 4 days later, she comes back with him walking beside her, rosy-faced and carrying a wooden toy horse, completely recovered. The spirit healer, she tells me, came by to check on the boy and hasn't spoken to her since. I watched the boy run in small circles in my waiting room and think in another 4 days, he would have been bathed in cold water every morning while barely eating. Children die from that, not from the illness, from the treatment. I don't say this out loud, there's no version of that conversation that ends well. The old man comes in walking with a stick, bent at the waist at a 45-degree angle, like someone folded him in half, and he's been waiting ever since to be unfolded. 30 years, he says before I ask. Lower back, 30 years of that. Healers, herbalists, a priest, a woman in the next village who said she could pull out the pain with her hands. Nothing. I look at his posture. The curve is muscular, not skeletal. I can see it in how he holds his shoulders, how he bears his weight forward. 30 years of tension, 30 years of favoring one side, 30 years of a back that was never properly stretched because nobody told him how. Stand up straight, I say. As straight as you can. He does. It's maybe 10 degrees better than his resting position. Now slowly bend forward. Let your hands drop toward the floor. Don't force it. Just let gravity do the work. He bends. He winces. He gets maybe halfway. Good. Now slowly back up. Now lean back slightly. Now side to side. I walk him through 5 minutes of the most basic mobility sequence I know. He moves like a man whose joints have been glued. By the 3rd repetition, something shifts in his expression. Again, I say, slower. He does it again. He straightens up. Not all the way. 30 years of damage doesn't reverse in 5 minutes, but noticeably, measurably. He stands there with his hands at his sides and looks at the wall in front of him, with an expression I don't know how to describe. Do this every morning, I tell him. Every evening, 10 minutes each time, come back in a week. He nods. He walks to the door. He stops and turns around. I've seen people cry from relief before, usually in the middle of a con when they thought their money was gone and then it came back. That's a specific kind of relief. This is different. This is 30 years of waking up in pain and being told that's simply how things are now. And then one morning, a stranger in a borrowed coat shows you how to bend your own spine. He doesn't say anything. He just stands there for a moment and then he leaves. I sit down on the examination bench after he's gone. I've sold fake investment opportunities. I've forged property documents. I've convinced people their money was going somewhere. It absolutely was not going. I know exactly what it feels like to take something from someone. This is the first time I've given something back. It's a strange feeling. Not unpleasant, just strange. I file it away and call the next patient. The last memorable case of the day arrives in the form of a woman moving at the speed of someone whose house is on fire, carrying a boy of about 5, who is examining his own fingers with the calm curiosity of someone who has absolutely no idea why all the adults around him are upset. He swallowed a coin, she says, an hour ago. I turned around for one moment. He just put it in his mouth and Edmund appears in the doorway behind her, face ashen. 3 people from the waiting room crowd in behind him to observe. I look at the boy, he looks at me. He waves one hand, he seems fine. How big was the coin? I ask. Medium. Normal. I don't know, it was. Does that matter? Can you get it out? Do you have to cut? We wait. I say. Silence. We wait. The mother repeats in the tone of someone who has misheard. The coin is in his stomach. His stomach connects to his intestines. His intestines lead out. The coin will follow the route. Everything else follows in 1 to 2 days. It will. You're sure? The mother says. Have you ever swallowed a grape seed? I ask. Yes, occasionally. Did you die? No, but a grape seed is not. The principle is that the coin is smooth. It has no edges that can catch. His insides are the same size as an adult's insides, proportionally. It will pass. Keep him eating normally, keep him drinking, and check his check when nature takes its course. When you find the coin, wash it before you put it back in circulation. The observer near the door makes a noise. The mother leaves looking dazed but slightly calmer. Edmund closes the door after her and turns to me. That's actually true. He says it's actually true, I say. He writes it in his ledger, underlines it twice. The next morning, Edmund tells me the coin appeared, exactly as predicted, and the mother came by before I arrived to leave a small cake at the door and tell him I was, and these were her words, touched by God. I think about my grandmother again. She would have found all of this very if the messenger arrives on a Tuesday, or what passes for Tuesday here. I still haven't fully mapped the local calendar, and he's been writing hard enough that his horse looks personally offended. 3 villages, he says. 2 days east. People coughing, people feverish, people falling down in the middle of doing ordinary things. 6 dead already. The village elders are asking for the doctor they've been hearing about. Edmund appears at my elbow before the messenger finishes his sentence. The eastern road is difficult this time of year, Edmund says. Muddy, there are reports of wolves on the stretch past the mill, and the villages are quite far, and your schedule here is already. Pack the bag, I tell him. Doctor, the extra linen, the ginger root, the chamomile, all of it. Edmund packs the bag. He does it with the expression of a man who objects strongly, but has decided that objecting out loud is not worth the effort. I take the bag, I take the cart, the messenger came in, and I leave. Reputation, I have learned, is the only currency that compounds faster than interest, and reputation is not built inside a building. The first village takes 3 hours to reach. Edmund was right about the road. It's appalling. A series of ruts filled with brown water that the cart navigates by falling into each one individually. By the time we arrive, I've bitten my tongue twice and developed a strong opinion about medieval road maintenance. The village elder meets me at the edge of the settlement. 50-odd people, maybe 60. Thatched roofs, mud walls. The kind of place that has existed in the same form for 200 years and sees no reason to change. I look around while the elder talks. The well is 8 meters from a pile of manure the size of a small house. Chickens are walking through it. Children are playing near it. The well rope is black with use and God knows what else. Inside the nearest house, I look through the open door. I count 4 adults, 3 children, 2 goats, and what appears to be a pig in the corner having a private moment. 40 feet away, a man coughs hard enough to shake his whole body. A woman near him puts her hand on his back. In 3 days, she'll have the same cough. I understand in approximately 15 seconds what is happening here. This is not a mysterious illness. This is not bad air or evil spirits or any of the other explanations that are going to be offered to me in the next hour. This is a settlement that has arranged itself in the most efficient possible configuration for spreading infection, and then express surprise when people get sick. I do not say any of this out loud. Instead, I walk the perimeter of the village with my hands behind my back and a thoughtful expression on my face, nodding occasionally. The elder follows me describing symptoms. I listen and nod and look at things. The illness comes from contaminated air, I announce, when I've walked the full circuit. The miasma rises from disturbed earth near water sources and enters the body through the breath. To treat it, we need to both cleanse the body from within and purify the ground, so the air becomes clean again. The elder stares at me. How do we purify the ground? I'll tell you exactly, but first the tea. It takes 20 minutes to get a fire going large enough, and another 20 to bring the water to a proper boil. I have the quantities of chamomile, mint, ginger, and honey measured out in my head, enough to make roughly 40 cups from what I've packed, which should cover the sick and then some. While the water heats, I pull the elder aside, away from the crowd. The tea will begin the internal cleansing. I tell him quietly, but tea alone isn't enough. The miasma is rooted in the earth near your water source. For the treatment to work, for the tea to have its full effect, the conditions that allow the miasma to persist must be removed. He leans in. What must we do? Move the waste pile at least 50 meters from the well, further if you can manage it. The sick must sleep separately from the healthy and separately from the enemy. Not because of spirits, because the miasma clings to breath, and too many breaths in a small space concentrate it. I say all of this with complete seriousness. Every word is true. None of the framing is true. The tea is good tea that will soothe inflamed throats and help people sleep, and do approximately nothing to the underlying cause. The sanitation measures are the actual medicine. But if I walk into this village and tell them their well is poisoning them and their animals are making them sick, I will spend 6 hours arguing about it and leave with nothing changed. If I tell them the tea requires clean ground to work properly, the ground will be clean by morning. The elder nods. He calls 3 men over and gives them instructions. By nightfall, the waste pile is being relocated. The sick are moved to 2 houses at the edge of the village. The animals are put outside. I stay 2 days. On the morning of the 3rd day, a man arrives. He's from the village local, clearly from the way the people react to him. He's wearing a coat with things hanging from the belt, bundles of dried herbs, small leather pouches, a carved bone of some kind. He looks at me like I've tracked mud into his house. I've heard what you've been doing here, he says. Herbal tea. Good morning, I say. Herbal tea is superstition. He announces loudly to the assembled villagers who have gathered, because there is apparently nothing more interesting than 2 medical practitioners having a dispute at 8 in the morning. Superstition and ignorance. The illness in this village is caused by an imbalance of the vital fluids. The treatment is bloodletting, which draws the corrupted humors out through the skin. This, he gestures at my kettle, is what old women give to crying children. Several villagers look at me, several look at him. I look at him for a moment. How many patients have you treated in the last 3 days? I ask. He stands taller. 4. I've treated 9. Let's compare in 3 days. All 4 of yours against all 9 of mine. Whoever has better results treats the rest of the village. He wasn't expecting this. The expected argument. The kind of argument where both sides talk at length and nothing is resolved. A concrete wager with a 3-day clock is different. Fine, he says. Fine, I say. We treat our respective patients. He does his bloodletting. I do my tea and my sanitation measures and my very specific instructions about boiling the water before anyone drinks it, which I frame as the heat drives out the miasma before it reaches the body, which is wrong in mechanism and completely right in effect. 3 days later, we count. My 9 patients, 8 recovering well, 1 still sick but improving. None worse. His 4 patients, 1 dead, 2 significantly worse, 1 about the same. The village is silent. He looks at the numbers. He looks at me. He opens his mouth, closes it. He picks up his coat, which he'd set down at the start of this, and he walks away. Across the greens, through the gate, down the road. I don't say anything. There is nothing to say. The numbers said it. The village elder puts his hand on my shoulder. I stay for the rest of the morning finishing treatment rounds, and then I get ready to leave. They bring gifts. A wheel of hard cheese, 2 loaves of bread, a bundle of dried meat, 3 lengths of linen cloth, a jar of honey, and a chicken. A live chicken presented to me with great ceremony by a small girl, who is clearly very proud to be the one carrying it. I look at the chicken. The chicken looks at me. Thank you, I say. I put the chicken in the cart. The chicken immediately makes clear that it has opinions about this arrangement. It voices these opinions continuously for the entire 3-hour return journey. Not occasionally, not when startled. Continuously, with the commitment of a creature that has decided to make a philosophical point about liberty. By the time the city gate comes into view, I have developed a level of respect for its conviction that I would not have believed possible 3 hours ago. I pull up to the hospital. There's a line outside. Not my regular lines. I recognize some of those faces. This is a new line. Different clothes, different faces. The mud on their boots a different color from the mud around here. Edmund comes out to meet the carts. He looks at the chicken. The chicken looks at Edmund and says something pointed. Word from the villages, he says. These people came from Milford and Ash Creek. They heard about the treatments. They've been waiting since this morning. I sit in the cart for a moment and look at the line. It has 36 people in it. I haven't even unpacked. The chicken screams. Give it to whoever wants it. I tell Edmund, climbing down. Keep the cheese for the kitchen. I pick up the medical bag and tell them I'll start in 20 minutes. I need to wash my hands. Edmund looks at the chicken. The chicken looks at Edmund, he takes it inside. That night I sit in my room with a cup of actual tea, not the ceremonial kind, just regular chamomile from the jar on my shelf, and think about the last 4 days. I won a medical competition with ginger tea, and the suggestion that perhaps the manure should not be directly adjacent to the drinking water. I beat a trained local practitioner by knowing that you should boil things before you put them in your body. The man whose entire professional identity is built around bloodletting walked away, because a basic hygiene intervention outperformed surgery. In my previous life, this would have been called fraud. You dress up a simple thing in impressive language, you make people believe the mechanism is mysterious and complex, and they pay you for the theater as much as for the result. That's the structure of a con. That's also, I'm realizing, the structure of what I just did. The difference, and I'm still working out whether it's a meaningful difference or just a comfortable story I'm telling myself, is that these people are actually better. The village elder moved his waste pile. The sick are separated from the healthy. 8 people are recovering who might not have recovered. That part is real. Whether the tea caused it or the sanitation caused it doesn't matter to the village elder. What matters is that it worked. I sit with this thought for a while. Then I finish my tea and go to sleep. Tomorrow there are 36 people in the line outside. The chicken, Edmund informs me via note slid under my door, has been rehomed with a family 2 streets over and is apparently thriving. Good for the chicken. The blacksmith arrives on a Wednesday morning and he doesn't come alone. His brother half carries him through the door and the smell arrives before both of them. Not the smell of the forge, something sweeter and worse. The blacksmith's right arm is wrapped in cloth that was probably white 3 days ago. The wrapping is soaked through in layers. Old brown over older brown, over something that's gone greenish at the edges. He holds the arm away from his body like it's a thing that belongs to someone else, and he's been asked to carry it. I unwrap it. The wound itself is on the forearm deep, the kind of cut that happens when a chisel slips in a moment of inattention. The wound is 4 days old, according to the brother. The edges are red and swollen, and from the wound running up toward the elbow and continuing past it, thin red lines track along the skin, like cracks in dried mud. I know what those lines are. I've never treated them, never seen them in person. But I've seen pictures. And I know what did the healer say, I ask. Came yesterday, the brother said the arm needs to come off at the elbow before the rot spreads. Said to bring him back this afternoon. We wanted a second opinion. The blacksmith says nothing. He's watching my face. I press carefully along the red lines. He flinches. The lines are warm under my fingers, warmer than the surrounding skin. They extend maybe 15 centimeters above the elbow. They haven't reached the shoulder. That matters. This is sepsis early stage if I'm reading it right. The infection is spreading through the lymph system, tracking toward the body's core. If it gets there, if it reaches the bloodstream fully, then cutting off the arm won't help and nothing will help. But it hasn't gotten there yet. I look at the blacksmiths. I'm going to clean the wound with boiling water and salt. It will hurt significantly. More than losing the arm. He says, no, I say honestly. Probably less. Then do it. I boil waters. I add salt. More than feels reasonable. The kind of concentration that I know from basic biology will kill surface bacteria. While it heats, I cut away the old bandaging and examine the wound itself. The edges are infected, but the wound isn't deep enough to have hit bone or major vessels. There's a chance here, not a certainty. I want to be clear with myself that this is not a certainty but a chance. I pour the boiling salted water over the wound. The blacksmith grips the table with his free hand and makes a sound that I feel in my back teeth. His brother looks away. I work quickly, cleaning the edges, removing the worst of the infected tissue with a small precise blade from the kit. Packing the wound with clean linen that I've held over the steam from the pot. Then a tight bandage, clean linen changed twice a day. Garlic, I tell the brother. Raw, have him eat 2 cloves every morning. Don't ask me to explain it. Just do it. I know garlic has antimicrobial properties. I don't know how to explain antimicrobial properties to the brother. The garlic will help the body fight the corruption from the inside. Is roughly accurate in outcome, if completely wrong in mechanism, and it's enough. Come back tomorrow morning, I say. Both of you. They come back the next morning. And the morning after that. On the 3rd day, I unwrap the arm and look at the red lines. They've stopped. Not gone, still faintly visible, but stopped advancing. The wound edges are less angry. The blacksmith has color in his face that wasn't there before. I don't celebrate out loud. I check the wound carefully, rebandage it, tell him to keep eating the garlic and send him home. Word travels the way it always does here, faster than horses, louder than it needs to be. By afternoon, half the city knows that Dr. Christopher saved the blacksmith's arm that healer Wart was going to amputate. I don't say a word about Wart. I don't need to. The city does it for me. The merchant comes in on a Friday. He's a large man in an expensive coat, the kind of expensive that announces itself without subtlety. Heavy fabric, brass buttons, a chain of some kind at the collar. He moves with the confidence of someone who is used to people rearranging themselves to make room for him. He sits down, looks around the examination room once, and seems mildly disappointed that it isn't more impressive. I've been feeling unwell, he says. Describe it. Fatigue, heaviness, a general. He gestures vaguely. Lack of vitality. I tire easily. I feel slow. I look at him. He's perhaps 45. Well fed in the specific way of a man who eats rich food at every meal and considers walking from his chair to his carriage to be sufficient physical activity. His color is normal, his eyes are clear, his breathing is easy, his hands folded in his lap are steady. How long has this been happening? I ask. Several months. Any pains? No. Fever? No. Dizziness? Occasionally after eating. I ask several more questions. Everything points to the same place. This man is, by all physical evidence, completely healthy. He is experiencing the fatigue of a middle-aged person who consumes more calories than he expends, sleeps irregularly, and sits in a chair for most of his waking hours. There's nothing wrong with him that a better daily routine wouldn't fix. I could tell him this. I could say eat less meat, walk more, sleep at a consistent hour, drink water instead of wine with your meals. This would take 2 minutes and cost him 3 copper pieces or... You're presenting with a classic pattern, I say, with the gravity of a man delivering important news. Biliary congestion with secondary energy stagnation. The liver, which governs the body's vital force, is struggling under excessive load. The result is precisely what you're experiencing. Fatigue, heaviness, post-meal dizziness, as the system diverts resources to digestion that should be circulating freely. He leans forward. Is it serious? Not yet. You've come at the right time. I prescribe reduce red meat to twice a week. Take a walk of no less than half an hour every morning before breakfast. Sleep no later than the second hour of dark, and drink 2 cups of warm water before the morning meal. I also prescribe a weekly liver tonic, chamomile and dandelion root steeped in hot water, which I explain stimulates the liver's clearing function. He listens to everything with the focus of a man receiving strategic intelligence. He leaves serious and purposeful. A week later, a messenger arrives with a pouch that contains more money than I charged for the previous 10 appointments combined. The note reads, remarkable improvement. My energy has returned entirely. You're the finest physician I have encountered in 3 provinces. I have told everyone. I sit with a pouch in my hand and think about this. I prescribed him a daily schedule. That's it. Walk in the morning, sleep at a reasonable hour, stop eating a pound of pork at every meal. This is advice that any sensible person could have given him for free. I wrapped it in a diagnosis I invented called the chamomile tea, a tonic instead of chamomile tea, and charged accordingly. He's better, genuinely better. The routine alone would improve anyone's energy. The outcome is real. The mechanism I described is theater. The pouch is heavy. This, I say to the empty room, is worth exactly as much as a cow. I put it in the box under the floorboard. The old woman comes in on a Monday, and something about her stops me before she even speaks. She walks slowly, one hand pressed flat against her sternum, the way people walk when something hurts with each breath. Her face is gray-pale in a way that isn't just the light. She sits down carefully, like the act of sitting requires thought. Pain in my chest, she says, started 2 days ago, comes and goes, sometimes down my left arm. I feel something shift in my attention, left arm, chest, comes and goes. I think of every symptom I know. I run through what I learned from that hospital drama, from the biology class, from an article I read once about cardiac events, pressure in the chest, left arm pain, jaw pain sometimes, sweating, nausea. Is it a pressing feeling, I ask? Like something heavy sitting on your chest? She looks at me. Yes, exactly like that. I don't have an electrocardiogram. I don't have aspirin in any reliable form. I don't have a cardiac unit, a defibrillator, a surgical team, oxygen, or any of the things that exist in my original world, specifically because people worked out over centuries how to treat this. I have chamomile tea and a wooden listening tube and a box of linen bandages. I do what I can. I listen to her chest through the wooden tube. I can hear her heartbeat irregular in a way that concerns me, but I have nothing to compare it to and no way to act on the information. I tell her to rest completely. No exertion, no heavy meals. Lie flat, keep warm. I'll come by tomorrow morning. I prescribe willow bark, the closest thing I have to anything that might thin the blood slightly. I know it's not enough. I know as I'm writing the instructions that it's probably not going to be enough. I send her home with her daughter, who has been sitting in the corner the whole time watching me with the eyes of someone who wants very badly to believe that the doctor has a solution. She dies 2 days later. Her son comes in the morning after and he's not quiet about it. He's in his 30s, broad-shouldered, still in his work clothes, and he stands in the middle of my examination room and tells me that his mother came to me with chest pains, and I sent her home and she died. And what kind of doctor does that and who gave me the right to? I don't argue. I don't defend myself, I stand there and I let him say it all. When he finishes, I say she had a disease of the heart in the final stage. There is no treatment I know of, or that any physician in this city knows of, that can stop a heart from failing once it has reached that point. I gave her what I could, it wasn't enough. I'm sorry. He stares at me. He's breathing hard. You're saying she was already dying, he says. I'm saying she was already dying, I say. Yes. He stands there for another moment. Then he leaves. 4 days later, he comes back. He stands in the doorway, not coming in. He looks at the floor. She'd been having the chest pains for months, he says. She didn't tell us. She didn't want us to worry. He pauses. I'm sorry for what I said. You don't need to apologize, I tell him. He nods once and leaves. That night I lie awake. I know intellectually that she was going to die regardless. I know that the medicine of this world had nothing for her. In the medicine of my world, the real medicine, the kind with hospitals and machines, would have had only slightly more. Sometimes hearts fail. That's what hearts do. But I also know that I looked at her and I thought, pressing chest pain, left arm. And I thought it for 2 seconds too late. I should have thought it the moment she sat down, the moment she pressed her hand to her sternum. I was slow. 1 second of faster thinking wouldn't have saved her, but I was slow. I need to know more. The books on my shelf are useless. The best of them confuses the liver with the source of emotion and recommends leeches for 11 out of 15 conditions. They will not help me be faster. But there are things I remember. Fragments, half-read articles, television programs, conversations overheard at parties where someone happened to be a nurse. I have more than I've been using. I haven't been systematic about it. I get up, find paper, and start writing down everything I know. Every symptom, every condition, every treatment I can recall. Not organized, just everything. In the order it comes to me. I write until the candle gets too short to read by. It fills 11 pages. It's not enough, but it's a start. 3 weeks later, I get called to a birth. I arrive to find a young woman, her third child, laboring for 14 hours already. The midwife meets me at the door with the face of someone who has been hoping not to need me and has run out of that hope. I go inside. I come out an hour later. The child survived. The mother didn't. The bleeding started before I arrived and didn't stop. And I stood in that room and went through everything I knew, and there was nothing, no technique, no pressure, no intervention that was within my capability to perform that was going to stop it. I stand outside the house in the early morning light, and I'm just angry. Angry at the books that describe the womb as governed by lunar influence. Angry at a world where obstetric hemorrhage is a death sentence, because nobody has worked out how to stop it. Angry underneath all of that at myself, for the specific helplessness of standing in a room where someone is dying, and knowing that the knowledge that could save them exists somewhere in another world in another century. And you can't reach it. I go home, I open the books again, I read everything about difficult births, about bleeding, about what the midwives know and what the physicians claim. I make more notes. The books have almost nothing useful. I write that down too. What I can't do, I can at least document. What I don't know, I can at least map the shape of. And somewhere in the things I half remember from a world with better medicine, there might be something. One thing that helps the next time. There will be a next time I close the books at dawn and go to see the morning's first patients. I am not a real doctor, but I am becoming one slowly, and at a cost I didn't fully anticipate. The waiting room is empty for the first time all week when he comes in, not a patient. I can tell immediately. Patients come in with something held in the body, a favored arm, a careful step, the particular way a person moves when something hurts. This man comes in with nothing held anywhere. He moves loosely, comfortably taking up the available space without apology. He sits down in the chair across from the examination bench, looks at me once, and then looks around the room with the unhurried curiosity of someone who has nowhere else to be. He's perhaps 40, medium build, forgettable face, the kind of face that's easy to look at and difficult to remember. He's wearing a good coat, dark wool, well made. On the left lapel, partially hidden by the fold of the fabric, a wine stain the color of old blood. Not large, the kind of stain a careful man would have had cleaned, and a man who doesn't worry about appearances would ignore. He doesn't worry about appearances. Noted. He looks back at me, says nothing. I wait. He waits. This is a technique. I've used it myself. Silence is uncomfortable. Most people fill it. The first person to speak reveals something about how much they want the conversation to end. I let the silence run for a full 30 seconds. He seems genuinely comfortable. I revise my estimate of him upward. You're not here for a medical consultation, I say. No, he agrees, though I appreciate the decor, very convincing. There it is. My name is Bruno, he says. I'm a merchant, cloth mostly some grain. I travel the roads between here and the eastern settlements quite often. He pauses. I was on the eastern road about 2 months ago, coming into the city. I keep my face neutral. Was it a pleasant journey? Mostly. There was an incident near the cliff road. He tilts his head slightly. A carriage came off the road just ahead of me. I was maybe 200 meters behind, enough distance to stop safely, not enough to see it happen in time to help. Another pause. The drop was significant. No survivors. That sounds terrible, I say. It was. He folds his hands in his lap. What was strange, and I've thought about this quite a bit, was the figure I saw on the road before it happened. A beggar from the look of him. Ragged clothes, no shoes. He was standing near the road when the carriage passed. He looks at me steadily. Then the carriage was gone, and a few hours later, a man in a doctor's coat walked into the city. The room is quiet. I look at Bruno. Bruno looks at me. I know this type. I know it the way you know your own handwriting. Because it's mine. The patience, the indirection, the careful architecture of implication rather than accusation. He's not here to threaten me. Not yet. He's here to establish that he can, and to see what I do with that information. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, I say. I'm not suggesting anything, he says pleasantly. I just thought it was an interesting coincidence, and I've always believed that interesting coincidences are worth noting. They have a way of creating mutual understanding between people. He smiles. I simply wanted to introduce myself. Neighbors should know each other. Malalis, you never know when you might need a friend. There's a version of this conversation where I deny everything. There's a version where I threaten him back. There's a version where I throw him out and wait to see what he does next. I don't take any of them. What kind of merchant did you say you were, I ask. Cloth and grain mostly. Good businesses. Steady demand. I lean back slightly. A merchant like that must have workers. People who carry things. Load carts. Physical work. People who get hurt occasionally. He watches me. If any of your people need medical attention, I say, send them here. I'll see them at no charge. The smile he gives me then is the smile of a man who has gotten approximately what he came for. Not everything. He didn't expect everything. Not on the first visit, but enough to confirm the shape of the arrangement. That's very generous, he says. Consider it professional courtesy, I say. Between neighbors he stands, adjusts his coat, gives me a nod that contains something like respect and leaves. I sit in the empty examination room for a moment after the door closes. I have just made a deal with a blackmailer, using exactly the same techniques I would have used to set up a mark in my previous life. Establish rapport, offer something real, frame the arrangement as mutual benefit rather than coercion. I did it automatically, without thinking the way a carpenter picks up a hammer. The man who just walked out of my office is me 3 years ago, if I'd gone into a different line of work. I think about this. Then I think I'm a fraudulent doctor who spent 2 months building a medical reputation in a city where I arrived as a dead man's ghost. I'm currently being blackmailed by a cloth merchant who watched the original act. My leverage against him is that he failed to report it promptly, which makes him complicit in whatever came after. The whole situation is a perfect closed system of mutual incrimination. In my old world, this would have been called a professional hazard. I go back to my patients. 6 days later, a man comes in with back pain. He's a large fellow, sun-weathered, with the hands of someone who lifts heavy things for a living. He says his name is Garrett. He says he works in the cloth trade. He says a friend recommended the doctor to him. I treat his back. The same sequence I showed the old man. The simple mobility work, plus a recommendation to lift with his legs rather than his spine, which I demonstrate using a small crate from the corner. He seems genuinely helped. He pays nothing. He thanks me and lives. 2 days after that, a different man. Felix also cloth trade, he says. A wrist problem, repetitive strain from handling bales. I diagnose, though I call it constriction of the wrist channel with inflammation of the working tissues, which sounds better and means the same thing. I show him how to rest it, how to wrap it for support, what to avoid. He thanks me and lives. He also pays nothing. 3 days after Felix, a young woman named Petra introduced to me as the niece of a business associate of a man in the cloth trade. She has a persistent cough that turns out to be straightforward seasonal inflammation, treated with the steam breathing technique I've started recommending for respiratory cases. Head over a bowl of hot water with a cloth over both, twice a day. She thanks me and lives. She also pays nothing. I keep a mental count. Garrett the loader, Felix with the wrist, Petra with the cough, then a man named Aldrich with a skin rash. Then 2 brothers who work at a grain warehouse with, respectively, a strained shoulder and a tooth abscess. The tooth I can't do much for except pack it with clove, which numbs pain locally, and recommend they find someone who extracts teeth, which is a service I have decided is outside my current capability. Then a woman who says she's a seamstress, but has the calluses of someone who does outdoor labor who has been having headaches. I treat the headaches the same way I treat all headaches. Water and rest. She thanks me and lives. That's 7 people in 2 weeks. 7 free consultations. All arriving with a specific phrasing. A friend in the cloth trade. An associate recommended me. Variations on the same sentence. And all paying nothing. Bruno is running a tab. He hasn't come back himself. He doesn't need to. Every free patient is a small, polite reminder that the arrangement exists and is ongoing. He's not greedy. He's not sending me 40 people a week, not pushing so hard that I'd have to push back. He's just present. A steady, low-level pressure. The kind that doesn't hurt but doesn't go away. I know this technique too, I've used it. It's more effective than demanding large things at once. On the 14th day, I'm closing up the examination room when Edmund comes in, looking slightly uncomfortable. A man left a message, he says. Bruno, he says to tell you that the arrangement is working well, and he looks forward to a continuing association. Thank him for the message, I say. Edmund writes it down. He doesn't ask questions. Edmund has developed a remarkable capacity for not asking questions, which is one of his better qualities. I close the cabinet where I keep the instruments and think about Bruno. The free consultations cost me time. Not money. The patients aren't taking spots that paying patients would fill, since my days are fully scheduled regardless. Just time. And in exchange I have, for now, the silence of the one person in the city who knows that I walked in from a road accident wearing a dead man's coat. It's a reasonable trade for now. The word for now is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and I know it. Bruno is patient. Patient people wait for the moment when the small arrangement stops being enough, when they want something larger, something that can't be paid in free wrist examinations. When that moment comes, the calculation will change entirely. I blow out the lamp and go upstairs. I've been a con man and I've been conned, and I know exactly where this road leads. The question isn't whether Bruno will eventually want more. The question is whether by the time he does, I'll have enough of something he can't afford to lose to make the answer no. I file this under problems for later and go to sleep. There are 24 people in the line tomorrow morning, paying ones. I have work to do. It's a Tuesday afternoon mid-consultation when the door opens and a man looks at me like he's seen someone come back from the dead, which technically is accurate. He's maybe 30, line and weathered, with the kind of face that's been outdoors for most of its existence. Sun creased around the eyes, rough-complexioned, a nose that's been broken at least once and reset badly. He's wearing working clothes, clean but worn. He stops in the doorway and stares at me, and his face does something complicated. It goes through confusion first, then a kind of careful hope. Like a man who thinks he's found a coin on the ground and is afraid to look directly at it in case it turns out to be a button. Then the hope wins. Christo, he says. His voice cracks slightly on the second syllable. You're alive. I have approximately 1 second to decide how to handle this. The body I'm in reacts before I do. Something in the chest. A warmth that isn't mine. A recognition that operates below the level of conscious thought. This face is familiar. This voice is familiar. Not to me, to the person whose bones I'm currently using. Whatever Christopher the beggar felt when he saw this man, I feel the ghost of it now, like warmth left in a chair after someone stands up. Mark, I say. The name comes out of me before I've found it. I didn't know his name. The body did. He crosses the room in 4 strides and grabs me by the shoulders, and I realize a moment too late that he's going to embrace me. And then he does, hard, and says something into my shoulder that I can't quite make out but sounds like a prayer. I stand there and let it happen. He pulls back and looks at my face with a specific scrutiny of someone checking for differences. I must pass the check because he doesn't say anything about that. His eyes are wet. We thought you were dead, he says. It's been over a year. I looked for you. Where have you been? What happened? I have prepared for nothing about this situation. I improvise. I don't remember all of it, I say carefully. There was an accident. A bad one. I was hurt. This is all technically true from a broad philosophical standpoint. I lost some time. I lost some details. I touched the side of my head in the universal gesture of head injury. Things came back slowly. Some of them are still unclear. Mark stares at me. You lost your memory. Some of it. Yes, he processes this. Then something shifts in his expression, the grief loosening slightly, making room for something else. That's Christo. That's the worst thing I've ever heard. And also somehow the most Christo thing I've ever heard. Of course you nearly die and forget about it. I prefer to think of it as moving forward, I say. He laughs. It's a surprised, wet laugh. The kind that comes out when you're trying not to cry and something gets through anyway. He sits down heavily in the patient's chair and runs both hands over his face. Then he starts talking. I learn the following things in the next hour. The previous Christopher, my Christopher, the one whose face I'm wearing, was born in a small town 2 days. Right east. His father was a tanner who died of a lung illness when Christopher was 12. His mother remarried someone who, by Mark's account, was not an improvement on the original. Christopher left at 16 and never went back. He and Mark met in the city when they were both 17, working at the same loading dock. They were friends for 12 years. They were also on several specific occasions in serious trouble together, and Mark appears to consider this a point of pride. Do you remember the rooster? Mark says, I have no idea what the rooster is. Remind me, I say, in the tone of a man retrieving something fuzzy. Mark's face lights up. The fair outside Milford. You decided, and I want to be clear, that this was your idea, not mine. You decided that the rooster in the prize pen was worth stealing because it was the finest rooster you'd ever seen. And you were going to sell it. Reasonable plan, I say. You stole it. You got it under your coat. You walked it out of the fairgrounds. And then Christo, then it crowed. Not once. Continuously. For the entire walk back to where we'd left our cart, which was half a mile at just. Mark makes a sustained crowing noise that draws Edmund's head around the corner from the hallway. I wave Edmund off, he disappears. Did we get away with it? I ask. We did not. We were caught approximately 40 seconds after the crowing started by a very large farmer and his 2 sons who were less than amused. Mark shakes his head with the smile of a man who has had years to find this funny. You apologize so convincingly that they let us go without involving the constable. I've always said you could talk your way out of a burning building. This, I note, is completely consistent with what I know about myself. What about the hay? I say, fishing, the haystack. Mark corrects me automatically. Not just any hay that was near Brennan's farm. We'd been working harvest that week and there was nowhere to sleep, so we climbed into the stack at the edge of the field. He pauses, which was fine until some of Brennan's workers decided the stack needed burning before the weather changed. How long before we noticed? I ask as though I'm trying to remember rather than trying to learn. You noticed before I did. You woke me up by falling on top of me while you were already running. Mark considers this. In fairness, the stack was mostly on fire by then. We came out looking like 2 very startled sausages. I laugh. I don't mean to, but the image is genuinely funny and comes out before I can stop it. Mark laughs too. And for a moment, the examination room is just 2 men laughing about a haystack. And I almost forget that I'm laughing at a story about someone who isn't me. Then he tells me about the girl. Do you remember Clara? He says, and his tone shifts just slightly, careful now, watching my face. Clara, I repeat. From the mill. You were convinced for about 3 months that she was, he pauses, that there was something there. You used to walk past the mill every morning just to happen to be walking past the mill. What happened? Her husband introduced himself, Mark says. Her husband, the blacksmith. There's a silence. A large blacksmith, I ask. Remarkably large, Mark says. He was very polite about it. Under the circumstances, I nod slowly. I see. You avoided that entire street for 2 years, Mark says. You go 4 blocks out of your way. I'm not saying that was the wrong decision. I'm saying the commitment was notable. I file all of this away, the tanner father, the loading dock, the rooster and the haystack and the blacksmith's wife. 12 years of a friendship that I'm receiving as second-hand information while nodding as though I remember it. It's the most elaborate identity assumption I've ever performed, and I'm doing it in real time with someone who actually knew the source material. I'm also, I realize, finding Christopher more interesting the more I learn about him. He stole a rooster because it was the finest rooster he'd ever seen. He woke his friend up in a burning haystack by falling on him while already running. He walked 4 blocks out of his way for 2 years because of a blacksmith he'd rather not encounter. He was, by all available evidence, broke, hapless, poorly organized, and consistently in more trouble than his situation warranted. He sounds like someone I would have liked. Toward the end of the hour, Mark leans back in the chair and looks at me with a different kind of attention. The joy of finding me is still there, but underneath it now is something more evaluating. You're really a doctor, he says. It isn't quite a question. I am, I say. Christo, he says my name, with the patience of a man who has said it many times in contexts requiring patience. You tried to treat a sick chicken when we were 14. You gave it grain soaked in river water because you'd heard somewhere that wet grain was easier to digest. It was dead by morning. I had limited information, I say. I'm bringing this up because I think it's relevant. You also once diagnosed yourself with heart trouble. Because you'd been running and your chest hurt and you made me sit with you for an hour in case you died. And then you ate a large meal and felt completely better and admitted you'd probably just been running too fast. The accident changed things. I say I studied, I had time, and I needed something to focus on, and I studied. Mark looks at me steadily, and now you're a doctor and now I'm a doctor. He sits with this for a moment. The blacksmith down the street, he says, his arm. I heard about that. What did you hear? That you saved it. That the other healer was going to cut it off and you didn't. He pauses. I also heard about the village with the contaminated well and the fever cases over winter. He looks at his hands. That's real, Christo. Whatever happened to you, that's real. I don't say anything. I believe you, he says finally. I don't entirely understand it, but I believe you. He stays in the city. He finds work at a merchant's warehouse, carrying, loading, the kind of work he's done most of his life. He comes by the hospital on his days off, and we sit in my small office, and he talks, and I listen and ask careful questions that I frame as trying to recover things I've forgotten. He doesn't know he's filling in a map. He thinks he's helping his friend remember. In some sense I cannot entirely explain. He is the previous Christopher, left nothing behind that I can find. No family that remembers him well. No property, no accumulated reputation in this city. But he left Mark, a man who sat with him for an hour in case he died of eating too much and running too fast. A man who got caught stealing a rooster in the worst possible way and is still, more than a decade later, describing it with affection. I've been many people. I've built identities from paperwork and research and careful observation. I've worn other people's histories like coats. This is the first time one of those histories came with someone who actually loved the person. I'm not sure what to do with that. I eat dinner with Mark on a Thursday evening at a tavern near the hospital. He orders too much and eats enthusiastically, and tells me a story about something that happened at the warehouse, involving a cart, a dog, and a misunderstanding about which crates were supposed to go where. I laugh in the right places. Some of the right places are actually genuinely funny. Walking back to the hospital afterward, I think, in my old life I had professional contacts and Marks, and people who owed me favors. I didn't have anything that looked like this. I'm not sure what to call it. The word that comes to mind is friend. It's unfamiliar. I try it out. It fits well enough. Edmund hires 2 assistants on a Monday morning and presents them to me in the corridor like a man unveiling a solution he's very proud of. The first one is named Pitt. He's 17, maybe 18, with the eager, unfinished look of someone who hasn't quite grown into his own face yet. He's wearing a new apron that's already slightly crooked. He shakes my hand with the enthusiasm of a person who has been looking forward to this job for some time. I'm very honored to assist you, doctor, he says. I've always been interested in medicine, the science of it, the study of the human. Good, I say. You can start by bringing fresh water to the examination room and changing the linen on the second bed. He goes to do this with the energy of someone performing an important task. The second assistant is Agnes. She's perhaps 60, small, with white hair pulled back tight, and hands that are permanently stained at the fingertips from decades of working with plants. She doesn't shake my hand. She looks at me for a moment with gray eyes that are doing something complicated behind them, nods once and says, I'll need to see your herb cabinet. I show her the herb cabinet. She goes through it methodically, picking up each jar, smelling some of them, setting them down in a slightly different order. She doesn't ask permission. When she's finished, she turns to me and says, You're low on yarrow. The valerian is old. It's lost most of its effectiveness. And whoever labeled the feverfew jar labeled it wrong. That's actually mugwort. Can you get more, I ask. Already know where to get it, she says. I'll bring a list. She brings the list that afternoon. It's 2 pages written in a small, precise hand, with each herb listed by its common name, its use, its correct dosage, contraindications, and which other herbs it interacts with poorly. I sit with this document and read it carefully. Some of it I recognize: the willow bark, the chamomile, the garlic. Some of it is new to me entirely. There are plants here I've never encountered, with properties I wouldn't have guessed. What's crow's foot used for? I ask. Agnes, who is reorganizing my supply shelf without having been asked to do so, answers without turning around. Reduces swelling. Topical application only. It's toxic if ingested. Useful for joint inflammation if you make a poultice with comfrey root. And yellow dock. Skin conditions primarily. Some people use it for digestive complaints, but the evidence for that is thin. She pauses. In my opinions. I write this down. I ask 3 more questions. She answers all of them with the same precise brevity. Still not turning around, still reorganizing the shelf. When I finished with the list, she finally turns and looks at me. The pricking, calculating look she had when she arrived is still there, but the quality of it has changed. She's still counting something, but the sum she's arriving at appears to be different from what she expected. You ask questions, she says, not like a doctor who already knows, like a doctor who wants to know more. Isn't that what a good doctor does? I say. She looks at me for a moment. It's what a good doctor does. She agrees. Or a very clever man who isn't what he appears to be. The silence that follows is roughly the length of a held breath. I prefer the first interpretation. I say. I know, she says. She picks up the reorganized supply list and makes a small notation at the bottom. I'll bring the yarrow tomorrow. She leaves. I sit with the feeling that I've just been examined far more thoroughly than any of my patients. 3 days into the new arrangement, I ask Pitt to hold a small mirror during an examination. A man has come in with a wound on the back of his shoulder. Awkward angle, hard to see directly. I need the mirror to examine it properly. Pitt holds the mirror. I position it. I begin examining the wound. There's a sound like a large book falling off a shelf, and then Pitt is on the floor. I catch the mirror with my left hand before it hits the ground. I look at Pitt. He's on his back, eyes closed, completely unconscious. The man on the examination bench looks down at him with the expression of someone who is unsure whether to be concerned or impressed. I hand the mirror to the patient. Hold this toward the window, please. Angle it slightly left. He does. I finish the examination. Pitt comes around 2 minutes later, blinking at the ceiling. Pitt, I say. I'm fine, he says immediately from the floor. You're on the floor. I'm aware. He sits up with dignity. It was the light. I think I just... You saw the wound and fainted. I say a pause. Yes. I look at him. He looks at me. The patient on the bench is watching this with open interest. Pitt, you are a doctor's assistant. I know, he says. Why are you afraid of blood? He straightens up slightly, still on the floor. When I applied for the position, he says carefully, I had the impression that the role would be more administrative records, supply inventories, correspondence. Edmund handles correspondence. I understand that now. Edmund hired you to assist with medical work. I understand that now too. He gets to his feet. He adjusts his apron. He looks at the wound on the patient's shoulder, goes slightly pale, and redirects his gaze to the middle distance. I'll adjust, he says, with the conviction of a man who is not entirely sure he'll adjust, but is committed to the claim. Breathe through your nose, I tell him, and eat something before the morning shift. Empty stomach makes it worse. He nods. He starts breathing visibly through his nose. He makes it through the rest of the morning without falling down again, which I consider progress. The boy is 8 years old, and he arrives in his father's arms at 7 in the evening. And the look on the father's face is the look of a man who has been frightened for long enough that the fear has gone quiet. 2 days, the father says. Pain in the stomach. Getting worse. He can't eat. This morning he started. He pauses. The pain moved. It was all over his stomach before. Now it's just here. He touches the lower right side of his own abdomen, indicating. I look at the boy. He's pale and sweating slightly, breathing shallow. I press gently on the area the father indicated. The boy makes a sharp sound and pulls away. I know what this is. I've known for about 30 seconds what this is, and the knowing sits in my stomach like a stone. Right lower quadrant pain, localized after initially being general fever, loss of appetite. Rebound tenderness when I release the pressure. The boy winces harder when I lift my fingers than when I press down, which means the peritoneum is already involved. This is appendicitis. Advanced enough that I don't have 2 or 3 days. I probably have less than 1. Without surgery, the appendix ruptures. Infection floods the abdominal cavity. In this world with no antibiotics, with no tools for what comes after a rupture, that's the end. I send the father to the waiting area and stand in the examination room for a moment by myself. I am a confidence man from a world 600 years in the future. My medical knowledge consists of a high school biology class, a hospital drama, several partially remembered articles, and the contents of Agnes's herb list. I have performed exactly 1 surgical procedure, the appendectomy on the child in part 4. I mean, no, wait. I have performed 0 abdominal surgeries. The child's appendectomy I performed last month was the first and only one, except I haven't done it yet. I'm about to do it for the first time. I am not a surgeon, but I am the only person in this building, possibly in this city, who knows what's happening inside this child's abdomen and has even a partial idea of what to do about it. I go and get Agnes. I explain what I know in as few words as possible, The symptoms, the diagnosis, what needs to happen, what will happen if it doesn't. Agnes listens without interrupting. When I finish, she looks at me for a moment. You've done this before? She asks. No, I say. Another moment of lookings. Tell me what you need, she says. We spend 20 minutes preparing. Agnes boils the instruments. I wash my hands longer and more thoroughly than I've ever washed them, the way surgeons wash in my original world, though I don't know the technical name for it here, and it doesn't matter. I talk through the procedure in my head. I remember what I know, the incision location, the layers underneath, what the appendix looks like, how to tie off and remove it, how to close. I know this the way you know something you've read about and watched a video of but never done, which is to say, I know the theory with the confidence of someone who has never discovered what theory doesn't prepare you for. There is no good version of this where I'm not scared. The boy's father has been told to wait outside. Pitt has been told to go home. It's just Agnes and me and the oil lamps and the boy on the table. And the boy is looking at me with the specific trust of a child who has decided that the adult in the room knows what to do. I pick up the blade. 4 hours later, I walk out of the room. I sit down on the floor in the corridor. Not because I plan to sit on the floor. I just stop moving and gravity does the rest. My back is against the wall, my legs are in front of me, and I stare at the ceiling and breathe. The boy is alive. The appendix is out. Agnes closed the incision after me because my hands were shaking too much to do the fine work at the end, and she did it without comment. The boy is sleeping. His fever is already marginally lower. I don't know if that's real or wishful thinking, but his color is better. The door opens and Agnes comes out. She looks at me on the floor. She sits down next to me without any particular comment, as though sitting on the floor in a corridor at 11 at night is a normal thing two colleagues do. We sit in silence for what might be 2 minutes or 5. Have you done that before? She asks. No, I say. More silence. I watched you during the sutured cases last month, she says. Your technique is unusual. I know it works. This time, I say. It worked this time. She's quiet for a moment. Then would you like some tea? Yes, I say. She gets up and goes to put the kettle on, and I sit on the floor for another few minutes in the empty corridor, listening to the city outside and the quiet sound of the boy breathing through the door behind me. I know enough to have saved him tonight. I didn't know enough to save the woman at the birth 3 weeks ago. I didn't know enough for the old woman with the heart. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being the most knowledgeable person in the room, while still knowing almost nothing from the gap between what you have and what you need, measured in people who didn't make it. Agnes brings 2 cups. She sits back down on the floor next to me, which I think may be the most unexpectedly decent thing anyone has done for me in this world. We drink our tea on the floor in the corridor, and neither of us says anything for a long time. I think about the boy asleep in the room behind us. I think about what I don't know. Tomorrow there will be a line at the door and I will walk through it, and I will do my best with what I have. Tonight I'm going to sit here until I stop shaking. The tea helps. Bruno comes back on a Thursday afternoon after the last patient has left, and Edmund has gone home and the hospital is quiet. He has a talent for timing, showing up in the gaps, in the moments when there are no witnesses. I notice this. In my experience, people who are good at timing are people who have thought carefully about what they're doing. He sits in the patient's chair with the ease of a man who has sat in it before and intends to sit in it again. He sets his hat on his knee. He looks around the room once, then at me. I have a situation, he says. Most people who come to see me do, I say. He smiles briefly. A business situation. There's a merchant in the city. Older man, quite wealthy. His health has been declining for some time. His family is concerned. He pauses. I'm helping the family navigate some complicated matters related to his estate. I see they need documentation. A physician's assessment, he folds his hands. Specifically, they need a formal medical opinion that the merchant is suffering from a deterioration of the mind, that his judgment is compromised, that he is, from a medical standpoint, no longer capable of managing his own affairs. The room is quiet. Is he, I ask? Bruno looks at me. Is he what? Suffering from deterioration of the mind. Is his judgment actually compromised? A small pause. The family believes. I'm asking about the man, I say. Not what the family believes. Bruno unfolds his hands and refolds them. The documentation would serve everyone's interests, he says. The family gains clarity on the estate. You gain a grateful associate with significant connections, and our existing arrangement continues without complication. I look at him. He's good at this. The framing is clean. Mutual benefit. No explicit threat. A soft landing built into every sentence. In another life, I would have admired the construction. I built sentences like these myself. But what he's asking me to write is a document that declares a living man incompetent so that other people can take control of his property. The man in question may be old, he may be unwell, he may genuinely be declining. None of that matters because Bruno doesn't know and doesn't care. He wants the paper regardless of what's actually true, which means the paper is a weapon, not a diagnosis. No, I say. Bruno is quiet for a moment. I want to be clear about what I'm asking. You're asking me to falsify a medical document to facilitate what is, in practical terms, theft from an elderly man. I keep my voice level. I'm saying no. His expression doesn't change much. Just a small settling, like something shifting into a less comfortable position. Then I think we need to revisit our arrangement, he says. Given what I know. Go to the judge, I say. He stops. Go tomorrow mornings. Tell him everything. Tell him you were on the Eastern Road 2 months ago. Tell him you saw the accident. Tell him you saw a man walk into the city afterward. Tell him all of it. I watch his face. And then when the judge asks you why you waited 2 months to come forward, when he asks why, during those 2 months you came to this hospital and received free medical treatment for yourself and 7 of your associates and said nothing. You can explain that too. Bruno is very still. You've been paid for your silence, I say. That's not a witness with a clear conscience and a story to tell. That's a man who made a deal and is now trying to renegotiate it. I lean back slightly. A judge will find that interesting. I think the judge will find that very interesting indeed. The silence in the room has a texture now. This is a stalemate, I say. We both know things. We both have exposure. That's been true since the first day you sat in that chair. The difference is that you came here today asking me to cross a line, and I'm not going to cross it. Everything else stays where it is. He picks up his hat from his knee. He turns it once in his hands. He stands. He doesn't say anything on his way out. He doesn't need to. The anger is in his posture. The set of his shoulders. The deliberate care with which he closes the door. Not slamming it. Closing it, which is somehow worse. I sit in the empty room. He'll think about this. He'll run the calculation again. He may decide the stalemate is acceptable. He may decide it isn't. I don't know which way he'll land, and I won't know until he does something. I file it under problems that are currently not exploding and move on. Mark comes by that evening. He does this 2 or 3 times a week now, stopping in after his shift at the warehouse, eating whatever Edmund has left in the kitchen, sitting in my office while I finish the day's notes. He talks. I listen and ask questions that are slightly too precise for a man with amnesia. And he answers them without noticing. Tonight he's quiet when he arrives. He eats, he sits, and then he stands up to look at the books on my shelf. I'm at my desk writing. I hear him behind me, the soft sound of a book being taken down, the pause of someone reading. The pause goes on too long. I turn around. He's holding one of the medical references from the shelf, a thinner volume, one that arrived with the bag from the carriage. He's looking at the inside front cover. I don't need to see it from here to know what's written there. I've looked at it myself. A name, a city, a date, none of which are mine. Mark looks up at me. He doesn't say anything for a moment. He just holds the book and looks at me with an expression I haven't seen on him before. Not angry, not frightened, something quieter and more serious. Like a man who has had a suspicion for a while and has just found the thing that confirms it. Christo, he says, who are you? I could deflect. I've deflected enough times now that I know exactly how to do it. Redirect the question. Introduce uncertainty. Make the other person doubt what they've seen. It would probably work. Mark trusts me. Trust is easy to use. I don't do it. I'm not sure exactly when I decided not to. Maybe right now. Maybe weeks ago. Maybe the moment he sat on the floor with me after the surgery and waited without asking anything. I don't know, but I don't deflect. Lock the door, I say. He locks it. He sits back down. He sets the book on the table between us. I look at it for a moment. Then I tell him. Not everything. There are parts of it I don't have words for. Parts that don't translate into any language that exists here. But the main shape of it. That I'm not Christopher. That Christopher, the real one, the one he knew is dead, died in the accident on the road. And something that I don't understand happened and I woke up where he had been, that I've been carrying his face and his name and learning his history from the inside out. And that every piece of it Mark has given me, I have filed away like a map of a country I'll never visit. I tell him that the medical knowledge is real, that wherever I came from, whatever I was before, I came from a place where medicine had advanced far enough that what I know here looks like magic, that I have been using it as best I can, that there have been failures. I tell him about the woman at the birth, about the old woman with the heart. I don't tell him about Bruno because Bruno is a separate problem, but I tell him about the fear. The specific fear of standing in a room where someone is dying and knowing your knowledge has a ceiling you can't see past until you hit it. When I finish, the room is very quiet. Mark sits with his forearms on his knees and looks at the floor. He stays that way for a while. Long enough that I stop trying to read his expression and just wait. My friend is dead, he says finally. Yes, he breathes out. Long and slow. He stops. Starts again. He was a good person. He had a bad run of luck and he made some bad decisions and he ended up in a bad place and he didn't deserve that. He was a good person. I know, I say. I know that from you. More silence. Are you helping people, he says. I'm trying to the blacksmith, the villages, the boy last week. Yes. He looks up at me then. He sits back in his chair. He reaches for the wine jug on the corner of the desk. He brought it. He usually brings something when he comes by and fills his cup, and then fills the second cup that's been sitting there and slides it across to me. He doesn't say anything for another moment. He looks at his wine. He looks at the book on the table. Christo always said he wasn't worth much, he says. Said good things weren't for people like him. I told him he was wrong. He never believed me. He turns the cup in his hands. I don't know if it counts for anything, but maybe in some strange broken way. He got to become something. Through you, he shakes his head once. He'd have found that very funny. I pick up my cup. Would he, I say? Enormously funny, Mark says. He'd have talked about it for years. He drinks, sets the cup down. When he looks at me again, his eyes are steadier. I'll keep your secret. I know, I say. But he holds up a finger. If I ever see you using this, the coat, the reputation, any of it, to take advantage of people, to line your own pockets when you could actually help someone. If I ever see that, he points the finger at me. I walk straight to the city guard. I tell them everything I know and everything I suspect, and I let them sort out the rest. I look at him. You just became my conscience, I say. Someone has to be, he says. You clearly weren't going to appoint one yourself. He refills his cup. I refill mine. We sit for a while longer in the locked office, not saying much, and outside the city settles into its evening sounds, and I think about a man who stole a rooster because it was the finest rooster he'd ever seen, and how he never thought he was worth anything, and how he was wrong. I don't say this out loud, but I drink to it anyway. I hear the crowd before I see anything. It starts as a low sound from the direction of the main gate. Not alarm, not festival, something in between. A kind of sound a city makes when something worth looking at has arrived. I'm in the middle of examining a farmer's infected toe when Pitt appears in the doorway with an expression that suggests the infected toe is no longer the most pressing matter. There's a procession, he says. There's always a procession, I say. Hold the lamp closer. Doctor. He steps further into the room. It's imperial colors. I look up. 2 minutes later, Edmund comes through the door at a speed I didn't know Edmund could achieve. He's the color of fresh plaster, that specific white that happens when all the blood has relocated to somewhere more urgent. He closes the door behind him and stands with his back against it. Doctor, he says. Edmund. His Majesty's advance riders are at the gate. He swallows. They're asking for the hospital. I look at the farmer's toe. The farmer looks at me. We share a brief moment of mutual understanding that the toe has been deprioritized. Why, I say. Edmund looks at me the way a man looks at someone who has just asked why the building is on fire. Because of you, he says. They specifically said, the physician of this city. I set down the instrument in my hand. I think very clearly and in some detail about the following. I am a fraudulent doctor who has been operating under a stolen professional identity for several months. I have just been informed that the emperor of this country has arrived at my hospital, specifically to see me. All right, I say to the farmer, come back tomorrow. Keep it wrapped. Keep it dry. Change the dressing every morning. He leaves very quickly, which I understand. I wash my hands. I straighten my coat. I tell Edmund to let them in. Then I stand in the examination room and think, with complete sincerity, that was a good run. Several months really quite good, all things considered. The emperor is smaller than I expected. This is always true of powerful men. In my experience, they expand in reputation until the actual person is almost disappointing by comparison. He's perhaps 60, Lane, with a face that has been weathered by something more than just outdoor living. Not unhealthy, not frail. Just tired in a way that has become structural, like the tiredness has been going on long enough that the body has reorganized itself around it. He comes in with 6 people, 4 guards who position themselves at the corners of the room, and 2 men in physician's robes who stand behind his left shoulder. The robes are fine, expensively made, with embroidery at the collar that probably took longer to complete than most of my medical training. The emperor looks at me without speaking for a moment. I look back at him. I don't bow not because I'm making a point, but because it doesn't occur to me until a beat after it should have, and by then the moment has passed. The emperor's eyes move across my face with the attention of someone who has spent a long time reading people, and is doing it now automatically. They tell me you make miracles, he says. They exaggerate, I say. I make outcomes. One of the physicians behind him makes a small sound that might be disapproval. The emperor almost smiles. I need an outcome, he says. He moves to the chair, Edmund's chair, the administrator's chair, which has been placed in the examination room because it's the best chair in the building, and sits in it with the careful ease of a man whose knees are not what they were. Sit down. I sit on the examination bench. We look at each other at roughly eye level, which seems to suit us both. The war in the north has been running for 2 years, he says. My knights win in the field and die in the tents. Most of the wounds are survivable. Arrow strikes, blade cuts, the kind of injuries a healthy man recovers from. But the wounds putrefy, the flesh goes bad. The men come home in carts instead of on horses. He pauses. My physicians tell me this is the nature of warfare, that there is no remedy, that I should pray and reduce the number of engagements. He doesn't look at his physicians when he says this. He doesn't need to. How many men, I ask? In the last campaign he considers, perhaps 1 in 3 who survived the battle did not survive the return journey. I do the arithmetic. I keep my face still. I've heard various things about your methods, he says. That you treat illness differently from any physician my advisors have consulted. That your recovery rates are unusual. He looks at me steadily. I want to know if you can do something for my soldiers. I open my mouth. The physician on the left, the taller one, older, with a silver chain of office at his collar, speaks first. Your Majesty, he says with respect. This man is a provincial practitioner with no court credentials, no recorded training at any recognized institution, and a reputation built primarily on rural cases and minor complaints. The treatment of battlefield wounds is a specialized field requiring how many soldiers died under your care last month, I say. The physician stops. I look at him pleasantly. You mentioned that battlefield wound treatment is a specialized field. I assume that means you've been treating the soldiers. How many died? He looks at me. He looks at the emperor. He straightens slightly. The mortality rate in such cases is. I'm asking for the number, I say. Not the rate. The number. How many men's? The room is very quiet. He doesn't answer. His face is going through several colors in quick succession. I'm still waiting, I say. The emperor says nothing. He watches. He appears, if I'm reading him correctly, to be finding this mildly interesting. The second physician, shorter, younger, with the defensive posture of a man who has committed to a position and intends to hold it, steps forward. The disease process and infected wounds is well understood, he says. The miasma from the battlefield rotting material, the exhalations of the dying, corrupts the air and enters the wound through the breath and the pores. Treatment must address the miasmic source through purification of the blood and hands cause it. That is not what the medical texts say patients should survive. I say, are your patients surviving? Another silence. The second physician's mouth opens and closes once, quietly like a fish reconsidering a decision. I look back at the emperor. He's watching me with those tired, careful eyes. You believe you can treat infected wounds, he says. It isn't a question. I believe I can develop a treatment, I say. I don't have it yet. What I know about infection, the mechanism, the cause, points toward a possible approach. I need time to develop it properly. How much time? 3 months, he considers this. And if you take 3 months and fail, I think about the honest answer to this question, which is, then the same number of soldiers die who would have died anyway. I think about whether this is the right thing to say to an emperor, who is looking at me with the eyes of a man who hangs people. If I promise a solution and don't deliver one, I say, I'll accept whatever consequence you determine is appropriate. This is technically the same answer, framed differently. The emperor looks at me for a long moment. 3 months, he says. If the treatment works, you'll have whatever you need. Resources, title, a position at court. If it doesn't, he pauses. We'll discuss your failure at that time. Both statements point to the same direction, and only one of them ends well for me. I nod. The emperor stands. His guards arrange themselves. The 2 physicians file out behind him, and the taller one, the one I asked about the death count, looks at me as he passes with the specific expression of a man who is currently losing an argument, and is planning to have an opinion about it later. The door closes. The room is empty. I sit on the examination bench in the quiet for a moment. Then I think clearly and in sequence, I need to create an antibiotic. The one I know exists. The one I know is possible is penicillin. It comes from a mold. A specific mold grown under specific conditions, processed in a specific way. I know the broad outline of this. I know Alexander Fleming's name and the approximate year, and the general shape of the discovery. I do not know the precise culture conditions, the extraction process, the dosage, or what specific mold means in practical terms when you're standing in a medieval hospital with a box of jars and no microscope. 3 months. I think this is fine. This is completely manageable. 3 months is actually a reasonable amount of time. People work under pressure all the time. I have Agnes who knows plants and Mark who will help without asking too many questions and Pitt who is learning not to faint. I have a solid foundation. I have more knowledge than anyone else in this city. I can do this. I sit with this thought. Then I think, I have no idea if I can do this. Then I stand up. Because sitting in an empty room thinking about whether I can do things is not the same as doing them. And I have exactly 3 months from today. And the first thing I need to do is find every piece of information I have on fungal mold and begin the process of growing something in a jar that might, in a best-case scenario, save several hundred soldiers. Lives. I go to get Agnes. The room at the back of the hospital's ground floor was being used for storage, broken furniture, old supply crates, a pair of wooden bed frames that had been there long enough to accumulate a layer of dust that suggested they predated the hospital itself. I clear it out on a Sunday, which means Edmund helps me move the furniture and asks no questions until Monday morning, at which point he appears in the doorway with his ledger and a look of mild concern. What are you doing in the back room? He says, research, I say. What kind of research? The kind that requires privacy and low foot traffic. I close the door partially. Tell anyone who asks that I'm developing a specialized method of blood purification under Imperial Commission. If they ask for details, tell them the details are classified. Edmund looks at the partially closed door. Are the details classified? They're classified because I don't have them yet, I say. Which is what research is. Go manage something. He writes in his ledger and leaves. He is genuinely a remarkable administrator. The first week is a process of elimination that I approach with more optimism than the results deserve. My logic is straightforward. Penicillin comes from Penicillium mold. Penicillium mold is a common environmental mold. It grows on bread, on fruit, on organic matter left in damp conditions. It's been present in every environment humans have lived in for as long as humans have existed. Which means it is definitely in this city, in this building, probably on the bread in the kitchen right now if I go look. The problem is that Penicillium is one of hundreds of mold species, all of which look more or less identical to the naked eye. I can't see at the cellular level. I don't have a microscope. I don't have any tool that would let me distinguish one mold from another, except by testing what they do. Which means I need to grow them, extract them, and test the extracts, and do this for enough different mold sources that I eventually hit the right one. This is, I understand, a fairly accurate recreation of how penicillin was actually discovered. This does not make me feel better about the fact that Alexander Fleming had laboratory equipment, and I have a back room with some clay pots. I start with bread mold. I put crust of bread in a dozen different pots, some wet, some dry, some with meat nearby, some without, different levels of light and air, and I wait for each one to produce a different mold culture. Then I take small amounts of each culture, dissolve them in the cleanest water I have, and test the solutions on mice. Mark brings me the mice. He does not ask why I need mice. He brings them in a wooden box with holes in the lid and sets them on the table without comment. This is one of his better qualities. I give the infected mice small doses of each extract. Most of the extracts do nothing. 2 of them appear to make the infection slightly worse. One mouse dies on the 3rd day of a trial that has nothing to do with infection, apparently of natural causes or perhaps of being a mouse in a box in a medical research room, which is a stressful lifestyle. By the end of the week, 0 promising results. 11 surviving mice of varying health. 1 dead mouse in a room that smells comprehensively of mold. Mark puts his head through the door on the 9th day. He takes in the room, pots on every surface, small cages on the floor along one wall, papers covered in notes stacked next to the lamp, a general atmosphere of controlled chaos that has been gradually losing the controlled part. He stands in the doorway and looks at all of it, with the expression of a man doing arithmetic. Christo, he says, have you slept? I sleep when the trials don't need monitoring. That's not what I asked. He steps inside, navigating around a cage. He looks at the pot nearest to him, a dense gray-green culture on bread that has been growing for 5 days. He looks at me. You've lost your mind. Possibly, I say. The jury is still out. This is going to help soldiers. If I find the right one, yes. He looks at the mice. Several of them look back at him. And if you don't find the right one, I write something in my notes. Then I don't find it. And I go back to the emperor in 3 months and explain that I failed. And he decides what to do about that. He said he'd hang you. He implied it. Mark is quiet for a moment. He looks at the pots, the mice, the papers, the lamp that's been burning for approximately 36 hours. He breathes out through his nose in the way he does when he's decided something. What do you need? He says. More bread, different bread, rye if you can find it. The dense kind that the northern bakers make, and fruit, old fruit, past ripe. The kind that's starting to turn, and leather, old leather, damp if possible. I want to test cultures from different materials. He's already moving. I'll be back in an hour. Mark, he looks back. Thank you, I say. He waves a hand and leaves, stepping over a cage on his way out, with the practiced ease of someone who has already accepted that the next 3 months of his life will involve navigating a room full of mold experiments. 12 days into the research, Bruno makes his move. I'm in the middle of adjusting a dosing trial when Pitt comes to the door with a look on his face that suggests he'd rather not be delivering this message. 2 city guards came, he says. They spoke to Edmund. Something about a complaint from a magistrate's office. About he glances at the pots. Unusual practices. I set down what I'm holding. Who filed the complaint? Pitt looks at the wall. A cloth merchant apparently named Bruno. Yes. I think about this for approximately 4 seconds. Then I go find Edmund. Edmund has handled it already. This is the thing about Edmund. He is genuinely excellent at his job when the job is administrative containment. He told the guards that the research in the back room is conducted under Imperial Commission related to the Emperor's personal request regarding battlefield medical treatments, and that any magistrate who wishes to inspect the premises is welcome to write to the Imperial household and request authorization. The guards left. The magistrate has not written to the Imperial household, because no magistrate who wishes to remain a magistrate in this city is going to pick a fight with the Emperor's commissioned physician over a cloth merchant's complaint. I go back to my room and write a brief note. I send Pitt to deliver it to Bruno with instructions to wait for him to read it. The note says, I know it was you. Come by the hospital at your convenience. He comes the next morning. I have the piece of paper ready on the table. I've been keeping records since the 2nd week. Dates, names, what each of Bruno's people received in free treatment. Cross-referenced with the dates Bruno visited. I've been doing this partly out of habit and partly because a con man knows that documentation is leverage, and leverage is what you need when a situation starts to turn. Bruno comes in. He sees the paper on the table before he sits down. He sits down anyway. He looks at the paper. He doesn't touch it. If this document reaches the judge, along with my account of your visit, where you asked me to falsify a medical declaration, the picture it creates is not flattering to you. He looks at the paper. You are a cloth merchant who has been quietly receiving free medical services in exchange for not reporting information you should have reported immediately. I'm not sure the magistrate sees us equally. He's quiet for a while. We had an arrangement, he says finally. We had an arrangement, I agree. And I kept my end of it until you asked me to falsify documents, which I declined. And then you went to the magistrate, which was a violation of the spirit of the arrangement, regardless of what you think about the letter of it. I pushed the paper slightly toward him, not close enough to touch, just closer. If you interfere with my work again in any form, through any intermediary, by any method, this document goes to the judge the same day. He looks at the paper. He looks at me. He stands up. He picks up his hat. He leaves. The door closes behind him quietly, as it always does. Day 23. I'm sitting in the back room at midnight with a lamp that needs new oil, and notes that cover 6 full pages, and a mouse that has died in a way that I find both scientifically interesting and personally discouraging. The current batch of cultures has produced 3 new mold variants. Different colors, different growth patterns, and all 3 extracts have been tested, and all 3 have done nothing useful. I write in my notes, day 23, cultures from rye bread variant C, citrus rind variant D, and old leather variant E, no antibacterial effect observed. Mouse in trial 4 died. Unrelated to treatments. Possibly stress. Possibly general mouse mortality. Unknowns. I put the pen down. I look at the walls. The mold does not look back at me, but I feel that it would if it could, and its expression would not be encouraging. Day 23, I say to the room. The mold hates me. The mold says nothing. The feeling I tell it is mutual. I refill the lamp. I open a new page of notes. I write at the top, Variant F, bread culture, unwrapped, left near window in night air for 72 hours before sealing. Begin trial 15. I have 10 weeks left. I go back to work. It happens because I'm exhausted. Not the useful kind of exhausted. Not the clean tired that comes from good hard work done well. The specific gritty exhaustion of someone who has been running the same failed experiment in 16 variations for 6 weeks and is starting to lose the ability to distinguish between productive iteration and repetition for its own sake. By the 41st day, I'm sleeping 4 or 5 hours, eating when Pitt brings something and I happen to notice it, and spending the rest of my time in a room that smells like a very old bakery. That night I run 2 cultures simultaneously. Variant R, a mold from old citrus rind that had looked slightly different from the others under the lamp, and Variant S, a bread culture I'd left exposed near the window for an extra day before sealing. I introduce both extracts to 2 separate infected mice and start writing the setup notes. Somewhere around the 3rd page of notes, I fall asleep at the table. I wake up with my face on the paper and ink on my cheek, and the lamp is burned very low and something is different. I sit up. I look at the rooms. Everything is where I left it except the pot for Variant R. I'd left it on the table to measure a final extract, and sometime in the night in the fog between one task and the next, I'd pushed it without meaning to, and it ended up against the side of Mouse 6's cage. The pot had tipped slightly. Some of the culture, not much. A small amount had seeped out through the rim and into the cage. Mouse 6 was the worst case I had. Deep infected wound in the left flank. Red lines extending 2 cm. High fever measurable by touch. 2 days ago she'd stopped eating, and I'd been recording her as a probable loss. I look at Mouse 6. Mouse 6 looks back at me. She's sitting up, both eyes open clear. She's groomed herself. The fur around the wound is cleaner than it was yesterday. I open the cage carefully and reach in, and she doesn't pull away. She just sits in my hand and breathes, small and warm and completely alive. I look at the wound. The red lines are shorter, not gone, still there, still visible, but measurably, unmistakably shorter than they were when I last checked. I put her back in the cage. I sit down. I stand up. I sit down again. I look at the overturned pots. I look at Mouse 6. I look at my notes, which are going to need a new section, and I pick up the pen and then put it down because my hand isn't quite steady. It works, I say to the room. The room says nothing. It works. I say it again because saying it once doesn't feel like enough. It works. I spend the next 30 minutes simply sitting with the information, turning it over. Looking for the place where I've made an error or confused a correlation with a cause. Mouse 6 is alive. The infection markers have reduced. The only new variable is the variant R culture that contacted her cage. I am not wronged. I get up very carefully and begin preparing a controlled replication. The next 2 weeks are the most productive and most nerve-destroying I have experienced in either of my lives. The first thing I need to confirm is that variant R is actually doing what I think it's doing. That the reduction in Mouse 6's infection was caused by the mold extract and not by chance, natural immune response, or whatever other variables a medieval backroom can generate. I run the same extract on 3 more infected mice. 2 of them improved. The 3rd shows no change for 4 days and then also improves. I run it again and again. By the 8th repetition, I'm reasonably certain. Then I need to work out the extraction properly. Pressing the raw culture produces a liquid, but the concentration varies wildly depending on how the culture has grown, how old it is, how I prepare it. I need something consistent. I try cold water extraction. I try warm water. I try pressing the culture through linen to filter it. I try leaving it to settle and using only the clear liquid above the sediment. I fill pages with notes on which methods produce extracts that work and which produce extracts that do nothing. Agnes, who I bring in on the 10th day because I need someone with genuine knowledge of extraction processes, looks at what I've been doing and reorganizes my filtration method in about 20 minutes in a way that doubles the consistency of the output. She doesn't ask what the mold is supposed to do. She asks what result I need from the filtration and she produces it. I could have asked her 6 weeks ago. I write this in my notes as lesson, ask Agnes first. Mark provides mice. He provides them in quantities that have apparently attracted neighborhood attention. My landlady asked me why I keep coming home with boxes that make noise, he says, setting the latest delivery on the floor. What did you tell her? I told her I'd taken up a hobby. Does she believe you? She believes I'm strange, which she already believed before, so it hasn't changed much. He looks at the room, which is now organized differently, the successful cultures on one side, the failed ones on the other, the extraction set up on the table with Agnes's improved filtration arrangement. He looks at Mouse 6, who is fully recovered and has been living in her cage for 2 weeks as what amounts to a research mascot. It's working, I say. He nods. He puts the new box down. He looks at it for a moment. Christo, he says. Sooner or later, you're going to have to test this on something bigger than a mouse. I know, I say. A soldier is considerably bigger than a mouse. The scaling math isn't that complicated. I'm not talking about the math, he says. He looks at me. I'm talking about the fact that if it works on the soldiers, everything changes. And if it doesn't, I know, I say again. He leaves the mice and goes. The soldiers arrive on a Thursday, 14 days before the 3-month deadline. 8 men transported in a covered cart under imperial escort. They're brought into the hospital's largest room, where I've had the beds moved and the floors scrubbed, and Agnes has arranged everything in the order we discussed. The court physicians arrive with them, both of them, the tall one with the chain of office and the shorter one who argued about bad air. They position themselves along the wall with the practiced stillness of people who intend to observe and report. I look at the soldiers. They are in bad shape. This is not a surprise. They sent the worst cases first, the ones the court physicians have already given up on. Wounds on arms, legs, torsos. All of them showing the same pattern I know from the blacksmith months ago. Dark edges, red lines, fever. 3 of them are barely conscious. One is talking quietly to himself in a way that might be prayer or might be delirium. I can't tell. I administer the extract. The dosing took me a week to work out. I scaled from the mouse trials and then added a margin because I'm not a pharmacologist. And I know I might be wronged. And being slightly conservative seemed wiser than the alternative. Each soldier receives a dose based on their approximate weight, introduced into the wound directly with a clean cloth and a small amount dissolved in water for drinking. Then I wait. Day 1, no visible change. The fevers are the same. The wounds look the same. I check everyone twice. Morning and evenings. Day 2. One soldier's fever may be marginally lower, or I may be measuring wishful thinking. I write down the number and move on. Day 3. Nothing clear. The court physician, the tall one with the chain, has taken up a position near the window where he can see the beds and I can see him. He is not doing anything. He is simply standing there, and on the 3rd morning I notice when I pass near him that the corner of his mouth has a very slight upward tendency. Not a smile. The anticipation of a smile. He thinks I'm failing. He's been thinking it for 3 days and he's starting to believe it. Day 4. I'm changing the dressing on the soldier nearest the door, the youngest one, perhaps 20, who has been unconscious more than awake when he speaks. The cold is gone, he says. I stop. The cold in the wound, he says. It was there since, for a long time it felt cold inside. It doesn't feel cold now. I look at the wound. I press around the edges carefully. The red lines, I measure them against the marks I made on the first day. They have retreated not dramatically, not miraculously, just measurably less. I keep my face neutral. I finish the dressing. I move to the next bed. Day 5. 2 soldiers ask for food. Real food, not broths. Actual food. A man running a serious infection at full strength does not want to eat. A man whose body is starting to win the fight again does. I send Pitt to the kitchen. Day 7. 5 of the 8 soldiers are sitting up. The youngest one walked to the window that morning with help and stood there looking at the street for 10 minutes before going back to bed. The 3 remaining cases are still serious. The infections were deep and old and it will take longer, but their fevers are lower and their wounds are not worsening. 5 out of 8. Better than I honestly expected. I'm writing the morning notes when I hear footsteps behind me, and then the tall court physician is standing at my shoulder. He waits until I've finished writing. He looks at the 5 soldiers who are sitting up, eating, talking quietly among themselves. He speaks at just above a whisper. How does it work? I cap the inkwell. A mold, a common type that grows on food, produces a substance that kills the infection in the wound. He's quiet for a moment. The mold kills the corruption. The mold produces something that kills the corruption. The mold itself isn't the treatment. What comes from it is, and the corruption what causes it. Small creatures, I say. Invisible to the eye. They enter the wound and multiply, and that's what the infection is. The substance from the mold kills them. He's very still. I can see him trying to fit this into the framework he has. And the framework doesn't have the right shape. That's, he says. He stops. He tries again. The texts don't describe anything like that. No, I agrees. It sounds like heresy. He says very quietly, not accusatory, almost reflexive, the word coming out before he can decide whether he means it. I look at the 5 soldiers who are eating breakfast. You can call it whatever you like, I say. I'd suggest calling it a treatment that works. He stands there for another moment. Then he walks back to his position by the window and doesn't say anything else for the rest of the morning. The shorter physician, who has been close enough to hear all of this, looks at his colleague, looks at the soldiers, looks at me, and writes something in a small notebook he's been keeping in his coat pocket. I go back to my notes. 8 days left until the deadline. 3 soldiers still seriously ill. 5 recovering. I prepare the next round of doses and think about scaling. If this works, if the next group of soldiers responds the way these 8 have, then the conversation with the Emperor is going to go very differently than the one I was preparing for 3 months ago. When I sat in this room and told myself that everything was under control. It wasn't under control, but it worked anyway. Occasionally that's enough. The Emperor arrives on a morning when the sky is doing something specific and golden with the light, which I notice because I've been awake since before dawn. Checking on the soldiers and the quality of the light is one of the few things in the last 3 months that hasn't required my direct intervention. He comes with a smaller retinue this time, 4 guards instead of 12. The 2 court physicians, an official of some kind, with a leather satchel, and a man I don't recognize who turns out to be a herald. He comes through the hospital's front door without ceremony, nods at Edmund, who is standing at the entrance looking like a man who has been standing at the entrance since approximately 4 in the morning, just in case, and walks directly to the soldiers' room. I follow him in. He stands at the foot of the first bed. The youngest soldier, the one who walked to the window on day 5, is sitting up and eating. He notices the Emperor starts to get up. The Emperor puts one hand out, not a command, just a gesture that means stay where you are, and the soldier stays where he is and nods instead. The Emperor moves down the row. He looks at each man. He doesn't speak to them, just looks the way you look at something you've been told about and are now confirming with your own eyes. 2 of the 3 who were still serious when I last reported are considerably better. The 3rd is still in bed but conscious, fever-broken, eating small amounts, 5 fully on their feet. 2 improving, 1 still serious. 8 who arrived in a state that his own physicians had documented as unlikely to survive. He reaches the end of the row. He turns around. He looks at me across the room. He doesn't say anything for a while. The room is quiet except for the ordinary sounds of men eating and the early morning city outside the windows. Then he smiles. It's not a large smile. Not the smile of a man at a celebration. It's the smile of someone who has been running a very long calculation and has finally arrived at a number that makes sense, a kind of relief expressed as warmth. It changes his face more than I would have expected. 7 out of 8, he says. 7 out of 8. I confirm the 8th is improving. I expect a full recovery. He nods once. He looks at the room again, at the clean linen, the organized layout, Agnes's careful arrangement of the treatment materials on the side table. Then he looks at the 2 court physicians who are standing against the wall, with the stillness of men who have decided that absolute neutrality of expression is their best available option. Dr. Christopher's treatment, he says to no one in particular, and therefore to everyone in the room, accomplished in 8 days what the court's medical staff has been unable to accomplish in 2 years of warfare. He says this in a tone that is purely factual, not unkind, simply descriptive. I find this worth noting. The tall physician's face is a careful blank. The shorter one appears to be examining the floor. The official with the leather satchel steps forward and opens it. He removes a sealed document and a small cloth purse, both of which he holds out to me with the manner of a man performing a rehearsed action. A land grant outside the city, the Emperor says. The income from it should cover your work comfortably. And a formal appointment. Imperial physician with the attendant credentials and protections. He pauses. The credentials will need to be backdated for administrative clarity. This last sentence is said with complete neutrality, and I understand exactly what it means. The imperial household has decided that having an officially credentialed court physician is more useful than investigating how he became one. I take the document in the purse. Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you, he says, which from an emperor apparently means something different than it does from ordinary people. Less gratitude and more acknowledgement. The recognition of a transaction completed to his satisfaction. He lives the way he came. The herald hasn't said anything the entire visit. The official follows with his empty satchel. The 2 court physicians file out last, and the tall one pauses at the door and looks back at me for a moment. Not with hostility, not with warmth, with something in between that might eventually become professional respect if given enough time in absence of further humiliation. The door closes. Edmund looks at the sealed document in my hand, with an expression that suggests he would very much like to administer it. I give it to him. He takes it with both hands. I'm back in my office by mid-morning, reading through the land grant, when Pitt knocks and says that a city magistrate has arrived and is asking to speak with me officially. I set the document down. I know before he's through the door what this is. The magistrate is a careful middle-aged man who has the look of someone doing a job he'd prefer to be doing under less complicated circumstances. He has an assistant with him who is writing everything down. He sits in the chair across from my desk, sets his hat on his knee, and tells me that a formal complaint has been submitted today by a merchant named Bruno, claiming that the individual known as Dr. Christopher arrived in this city under a false identity, having taken the possessions of a physician who died in a carriage accident on the Eastern Road and has been practicing medicine fraudulently for the past several months. He reads this from a paper. He reads it in the tone of a man who has read Stranger Things from paper and is reserving judgment. When he finishes, he looks at me. The complainant states he was a witness to the accident. He says that he saw the individual he's now identified as you on the road that day, and that you entered the city shortly after the accident wearing the deceased physician's clothing. I let him finish, then I say, may I ask when this complaint was filed this morning? This morning, I say, the same morning that the emperor visited this hospital to award an imperial commendation and a court appointment. The magistrate says nothing, but his expression does something brief and complicated. Bruno also came to me approximately 3 weeks ago. I say and requested that I write a formal medical declaration, stating that a specific merchant in this city was suffering from mental deterioration and was legally incompetent to manage his own affairs. The purpose was to facilitate a dispute over that merchant's estate. I open the desk drawer and take out the paper I've been keeping. I also kept a record of the conversation, including the date and the name of the merchant he mentioned. I slide the paper across the desk. There was a witness to that conversation. The magistrate looks at the paper. His assistant writes something down. Who is the witness, he says. Mark, he works at Feldman's warehouse on the east side. He was in this office when Bruno came to make his request. Mark comes in an hour later. The magistrate's assistant is still there, still writing. Mark sits down, looks at the assistant, looks at the magistrate and says, what do you need to know? The magistrate describes what he needs confirmed. Mark says, yes. I was here. Bruno came in and asked the doctor to write that some merchant was out of his mind. The doctor said no. Bruno left angry. He pauses. That's what happened. I'm not saying it for any particular reason other than that it's what happened. The magistrate looks at his assistant. The assistant looks at his notes. Something passes between them that I can't quite read. Bruno comes by the hospital that afternoon, before the magistrate has finished his preliminary review. He comes in without knocking, he never knocks, and stands in the middle of my office with his hat in his hands and a look on his face that is different from any expression I've seen on him before. Not the smooth, patient confidence of his first visit, not the controlled anger of the last one, something more exposed, the look of a man who has made a significant move and watched it turn against him. And is still processing how you won, he says. The magistrate hasn't finished, I say. You won, he says again. He's not arguing, just stating. You outmaneuvered me. Fine. He looks at me steadily. But you're still a fraud. You're still someone who walked into the city wearing a dead man's coat and told everyone he was a doctor. Yes, I say. He pauses. He wasn't expecting agreement. And while I was doing that, I say, I treated the infections that the real doctors in this city were leaving to fester. I went to the villages when nobody else would go. I stopped a contaminated well from killing 200 people. I operated on a child who would have died otherwise. I've watched people die who I couldn't save, and I've read every book in this building twice, trying to understand what I missed. I look at him, and last week, I watched 5 soldiers who your court's physicians had written off sit up and ask for breakfast. He is quiet. What did you do? I say. During the same period, what did you do that was worth a comparable conversation? The silence in the room is absolute. He puts his hat back on. He walks to the door. He stops with his hand on the frame and stands there for a moment without turning around. Then he leaves. The door closes behind him. The case, as it turns out, goes fairly straightforwardly from there. The magistrate finds that Bruno's complaint appears to have been motivated by personal grievance, following a refused request for fraudulent documentation. Bruno is placed under formal investigation for attempted document falsification. The investigation takes 6 weeks and results in a fine and a requirement that he compensate the merchant he'd been trying to defraud. He leaves the city the following month. I hear this from Edmund, who hears it from someone at the market, and I think about it for approximately 30 seconds and then go back to work. There are 20 people in the line and Agnes needs to talk to me about the new herb shipment, and Pitt has fainted again. Apparently in the supply room this time alone, which is a new development. And the soldiers are still here, and I need to write up the full treatment protagonist call before the Emperor's physicians take it back to the capital. I have things to do. Agnes comes in on a Tuesday evening, after the last patient has gone and Edmund has locked the front register and gone home for the night. She knocks once, which she never does. Agnes does not knock. Agnes arrives and I say come in, and she comes in and sits down across from my desk with the particular stillness of someone who has been deciding whether to have a conversation for a long time and has finally decided. She folds her hands in her lap. She looks at me. I know you aren't the doctor they were expecting, she says. No preamble, no approach from the side. Agnes in all things takes the direct route. I look at her. I don't say anything. I've learned that Agnes, when she has something to say, prefers to say all of it before receiving a response, and that interrupting her before she's finished is both futile and somewhat rude. I've worked with 3 physicians, she says, proper ones, trained, credentialed, the kind who come with letters from medical schools and speak about the humors with great authority. I know how they ask questions. She pauses. They ask questions to confirm what they already know, to guide the patient toward the answer that matches their diagnosis. The question is a formality. She looks at me steadily. You ask questions because you don't know the answer. You ask to find out. You've been doing it since the first week. Every herb I mentioned, every plant property, every local remedy. You wrote it down, not because it was new information you were adding to existing knowledge. She tilts her head slightly because it was simply new information. The room is quiet. You learn every day, she says, the way a student learns, the way someone learns who started from a different place than everyone around them thinks they did. I lean back in my chair. I consider several responses. I choose honesty, which has been working better than the alternatives lately. What are you going to do with that, I ask. She looks at me as though the question is mildly surprising. I'm already doing it, she says. The same thing I've been doing for 8 months. Coming in every morning, preparing the herbs, assisting in the examination room, telling you when you're about to make a mistake with a dosage. A pause. Nothing changes. Why, I say. She's quiet for a moment. Not thinking about the answer. She already knows the answer. I can tell. She's deciding how much of it to give me. I've watched physicians my whole working life, she says. I've watched men with excellent credentials make decisions that killed patients because the credential told them they already knew the right answer and they stopped asking questions somewhere around age 30. She looks at her folded hands and I've watched you, whoever you actually are, perform a surgery you'd never done before on a child who would have died otherwise, and sit on the floor in the corridor afterward because your hands were shaking and then come back the next morning and do it all again. She looks up. I'm not interested in where you came from. I'm interested in what you do when you're here. The silence after this is the comfortable kind. You could have said something months ago, I say. I waited until I was sure, she says. I'm sure now. I nod. She nods. There is, I think, nothing else that needs to be said about this. Agnes has stated her position with complete clarity and apparent finality, and I believe her because Agnes does not say things she doesn't mean. This is one of her most consistently useful qualities. The door opens. Pitt leans in. He's holding a supply list and wearing the expression of someone who walked into a room 3 seconds before he should have. He looks at Agnes. He looks at me. He looks at the quality of the silence between us, which is the quality of a conversation that has just concluded something significant. He takes a step backward. He says. He gestures vaguely at the hallway. I had a question, but it can. I'll come back tomorrow or the next day. Whenever is, he points at the supply list as though it explains something good. He disappears. Agnes watches the empty doorway for a moment. Then she looks back at me. He's improved, she says. He fainted in the supply room alone last week. But he didn't faint at all during the soldier treatments, which is progress. It is, I agree. He asked me last month if he could learn more about the herbs. The names, the properties, the preparation. She stands smoothing her apron. I told him yes. She leaves. No goodbye. Agnes doesn't say goodbye at the end of a workday. She simply stops being present, which is consistent with everything else about her. I sit at my desk for a moment and think about how many people in this building know or suspect, or have quietly decided not to ask, exactly who I am and where I come from. The list is longer than I intended. Mark comes by 2 evenings later. He has a bag with him. Not large, just the kind of bag a person carries when they're going somewhere for more than a day and less than forever. He sets it down by the door when he comes in, which tells me everything before he says a word. I found work, he says, in Brennan's Port. A shipping company, they need someone to manage the warehouse. Better pay, better situation. He sits down in the familiar chair, the one he always sits in, and he looks at me with the same expression he's had since the night I told him who I was. Open, steady. A little sad in a way he doesn't perform. I've been thinking about going for a while. It felt like the right time. It is, I say. And I mean it. He's been in this city. Partly because I was here. That's not a reason to stay somewhere indefinitely. I get the wines. I pour 2 cups. He takes his and holds it without drinking for a moment. How are the soldiers? He says 7 fully recovered. The 8th will take another month. But he'll get there, he nods, and the treatment they're taking it to the capital. The court physicians are writing it up with their names attached primarily. But my name is in the documentation. I shrug. The treatment is what matters, not who gets credit. He gives me a look that says he recognizes this as an uncharacteristically gracious position for me, and is choosing not to comment on it. We drink. He was a good person, Mark says. Not from nowhere. We both know who he means. Christo, he was kind underneath all the mess. He'd give you his last coin and then complain about it for a week, but he'd give you the coin. He turns the cup in his hands. He always said he wasn't worth much. Said good things weren't for people like him. I argued with him about it for 12 years, and he never believed me. He was wrong, I say. I know he was wrong. Mark looks at me, and I know this is a strange thing to say. It's one of the stranger things about a situation that has been fairly strange throughout. But I think in whatever way this works, he got to become something. Through you, the villages, the blacksmith's arm, the boy, the soldiers. He shakes his head slowly. He'd have found it absurd. He'd also have been very proud. I don't say anything for a moment. He'd have found the rooster story funnier than anything I say. Mark laughs, a real one, surprised out of him. He would have. He'd have told it to everyone. He finishes his wine, sets the cup down, looks around the office. The books, the notes covering the desk, the supply lists in Agnes's precise handwriting. The small clay pot on the corner of the shelf that was the first successful mold culture, and that I've kept for reasons I haven't entirely examined. You're going to be all right, he says. It isn't quite a question, probably, I say. That's the most honest thing you've said in months. He stands up. He picks up his bag. He comes around the desk and puts his hand on my shoulder for a moment, in the way men do when they've decided not to make a thing of something, and the hand is the thing. Then he walks out the door. I hear his footsteps in the corridor and the front door opening, and the night air briefly present and then gone when it closes. I stay at my desk. Through the window, the street is settling into evening, lamps being lit in the buildings across the way, a cart moving slowly toward the market district, 2 people walking in the direction of the tavern. Ordinary, completely ordinary. I watch it for a while. I think about a man who stole a rooster at a fair, because it was the finest rooster he'd ever seen, and who never believed he was worth much, and who in some strange sidelong way got to be worth something after all. I think about that for a few minutes. Then I pull the treatment protagonist call I've been writing toward me, uncap the inkwell, and go back to work. There are 22 people in tomorrow's line. Agnes left a note about the new yarrow supply. Pitt, who apparently told Edmund he wants to learn herb preparation, has been added to Agnes's morning schedule. The work continues. It always continues. The last morning starts the same way every other morning has started for the past 8 months. Pitt opens the front door at the usual time. Edmund checks the supply register and writes 3 things in his letter. Agnes arrives with something wrapped in cloth. Fresh herbs from wherever Agnes gets fresh herbs, which I've never successfully determined, and goes directly to the preparation room without speaking to anyone. The line outside forms the way it always forms, the earlier rivers first, then the middle of the morning ones, then the late ones who show up hoping there's still time. I see patients. The first child of the morning is 8 years old, and has a throat so red I can see it from across the room when she opens her mouth. Her mother tells me it started 2 days ago, that the child can barely swallow, that she hasn't slept. I look at the throat, feel the glands, check the fever. Tonsillitis, classic, straightforward, the kind that responds well to warm honey water and rest in time. I write the instructions out carefully, because the mother is the kind of person who will follow them exactly if they're written down, and approximately if they're not. And approximately matters less with tonsillitis, but the habit is worth building. The child looks at me solemnly while I explain the treatment to her mother. Then she says, with the directness that belongs exclusively to 8-year-olds, "Are you going to do something to my throat?" "No," I say. She looks relieved. "Honey and warm water," I tell her. 3 times a day. It tastes better than it sounds. She looks unconvinced but accepts this. The old man with the knee has been coming in once a month for 4 months. His name is Gerald. He's 72, and his left knee has been swollen and painful since a fall 2 winters ago. We've been managing it, the exercises, the heat, the specific way of walking that distributes weight differently, and each month he comes in, and I check the progress and we discuss adjustments. Today he comes in and sits down and looks at me and says, "I heard you're leaving for a while," I say. "The capital, I'll be back." He nods. He extends his leg. I examine the knee. The swelling is down compared to when we started. He can walk unassisted and he does most days. He still can't run, but at 72 the relevant question is not whether you can run. It's better, he says, stating the fact. Not as a compliment. Yes, I say. Keep doing the morning exercises. Don't skip them when it feels good. That's when people skip them. And then it stops feeling good. He makes a sound of acknowledgement that might mean he'll follow this advice, or might mean he's heard it. He gets up at the door, he turns back. The young man, he says. The one learning the herbs. Pit, he helped me last week when you were busy. Knew what to say about the swelling. He pauses. He's going to be all right. He lives. I sit with that for a moment before calling the next patient. The woman with the rash comes in last, before the midday break. She's been itching for 2 weeks. She says arms, neck, the sides of her face. She's tried 3 things from the herbalist. None of them worked. She's getting desperate in the way people get desperate when something isn't serious enough to be terrifying, but is persistent enough to be maddening. I look at the rash. It's raised, slightly red, distributed in the specific pattern that appears where skin has been in contact with something new. Has anything changed recently? I say. New soap, new clothing material, new animal in the house. She thinks. We got a sheep, she says. 2 weeks ago, my husband's idea. I look at the rash. I look at hers. Do you handle the sheep? Every day. My husband doesn't like to. Stop handling the sheep for 1 week, I say. Wash your arms and neck after you're near it with clean water. Come back if it isn't better. She stares at me. The sheep is causing this. Some people react to wool, to lanolin, the oil in the fleece. It's not dangerous, just uncomfortable. Your skin doesn't like the sheep. The sheep is perfectly friendly, she says, with the mild offense of someone defending a family member. I'm sure it is, I say. Your skin disagrees. She leaves looking uncertain about the sheep and mildly annoyed at her own arms. At midday, I close the examination room and go through the building one last time. The supply room organized by Agnes into a system so precise that I still occasionally can't find things because I've put them back in the wrong place, and Agnes has silently corrected them. The records room, Edmund's territory, 12 months of careful ledger entries in his exact small hand. The back room where the research happened now cleaned out, the pot's gone, the mouse cage is gone. One faint smell of mold that might be real or might be memory. The soldier's room empty now, all 8 discharged. The last one 3 days ago. The beds are stripped and clean, ready for whoever comes next. I stand in the doorway of that room for a moment. Pitt is at the front door when I come down with my bag. He's standing very straight in the way he stands when he's trying to make a particular impression, which is endearing. He's wearing his good apron, the one without the ink stain on the front, which means he's been saving it for this. He looks at the bag in my hand and then at my face, and then at a point slightly past my shoulder in the middle distance, which is how Pitt looks at things when he's decided to say something and is building up to it. I wanted to say he starts, he stops, he tries again. I've learned that I'm better with the blood now mostly. I didn't faint at all last week, and the week before he makes a small hand gesture that dismisses the week before. Once but almost not at all. That's real progress, I say. He straightens further, which I wouldn't have thought geometrically possible. I wanted you to know that what you do here, what you've been doing. I used to think medicine was about knowing, having the right knowledge and applying it correctly. He looks at me now directly. You taught me that it's about thinking, that the knowing comes from the thinking, not the other way around. That you ask the question and then you follow where it goes. He pauses. I didn't understand that before. I look at him, he's going to be a good physician. Not yet. He has years of learning ahead, and he's still figuring out that fainting in front of patients is a problem worth solving. But the thing that makes a good physician, the actual essential thing he's got. That's exactly it, I say. Don't lose that. He nods with the gravity of someone making a commitment. I shake his hand. He shakes mine back with the same enthusiasm as the first day, which some things don't change. Agnes is waiting in the corridor. She holds out a notebook, thick, worn at the corners, filled with her small, precise handwriting. I take it and look at the first page. Herb names, properties, dosages, interactions, sources, seasonal availability, preparation methods. Every piece of knowledge she has organized for transport. You won't find anything like this in the capital, she says. The court physicians use books. Books are wrong about half of it. I know, I say. When you come back, she says, I'll have updated it. Not if, when. I put the notebook in my bags. She nods once and goes back to the preparation room, because Agnes does not do prolonged goodbyes, which is consistent with everything else about her. The carriage leaves at the second hour past noon. I sit by the window and watch the city go past. The market street. The square. The corner where the line forms in the mornings. The side street where Gerald lives. The bakery that supplied approximately 40% of my mold cultures and doesn't know it. The gate. The road. The city falls behind. I watch the road ahead. The images come without effort. The way things come when you're moving and have nothing to do but think. The cafe in another world and the face of a client and a pressure in the chest that ended one thing and started another. An overturned carriage at the bottom of a cliff. 7 minutes with a coat button. A man's ankle rotating back into place and the sound of him walking out the door. A child who swallowed a coin. An old man standing straight for the first time in a year. Crying in the doorway. Herbal tea defeating a healer in a tournament. Mark's face when he found someone he thought was dead. The red lines on the blacksmith's arm retreating. A child on an operating table in 4 hours with shaking hands. A pot of mold tipped against a mouse's cage. Soldiers asking for breakfast. I think about what I was in that other world. The thing I was good at was understanding people. What they needed, what they were afraid of, what they wanted to believe, and then using that, finding the shape of a person's hope and building something in it that looked exactly right until you looked closely. I turned that skill sideways. Here I found what people needed and I gave it to them. Not always. Not the woman with the heart. Not the young mother at the difficult birth. Not always, but enough times that it adds up to something. In the old world, I took from people things they couldn't afford to lose. Here I've been giving people things they didn't know they could have. I don't know why this happened. I don't know the mechanism, the logic, the reason it was me on that road at that moment in that body. I have thought about it enough to know that I'm not going to arrive at an answer by thinking harder. And I've made a kind of peace with that. What I know is this. Somewhere in the shape of who I was. The operator, the reader of people, the builder of convincing things from available materials. There was apparently also this. A doctor. It took a different world to find it. The capital announces itself before it appears. The density of traffic on the road increasing. The size of the buildings growing. The quality of the noise changing from the scattered sounds of a town to the continuous layered hum of somewhere large. The carriage enters the city through a gate wider than the one I came through 8 months ago on foot, in a dead man's coat, with no idea what came next. There's a crowd, a small one. I'm not apparently important enough for a large crowd, which is fine. An official retinue, a herald, several men on horses wearing imperial livery. Edmund sent word ahead, or the court did, or both. The carriage stops, I pick up my bag. Agnes's notebook is in it. The imperial appointment document is in it. 12 months of notes and protagonist calls and treatment records, everything I've learned and written down are in it. The coat, the original coat, the one from the carriage, still fits and still buttons, though I no longer need 7 minutes. I open the door and step out. The herald steps forward with the practiced bearing of a man who announces things for a living, and is going to announce this one whether anyone is listening or not. Dr. Christopher, he says in the carrying voice of his profession, imperial physician to his majesty, arrived from the eastern province. The small crowd watches, some of them applaud. I don't know why they're here. Curiosity probably, or proximity, or the specific human instinct to watch arrivals. I stand in the street with my bag and look at the city. I'm a con man from a world 600 years in the future. I arrived here in the wrong body on the wrong road at the wrong time, and I told everyone I was a doctor. I was not a doctor. I am now, by most reasonable definitions, a doctor. These two things are both true simultaneously, and I have stopped finding it a contradiction. My name is Christopher. I am a fraud. I am a physician. I have been both of these things at the same time for the better part of a year, and the overlap between them turned out to be larger than I anticipated. And somewhere in that overlap, I found something I didn't have in my previous life, which is the specific satisfaction of being useful. That's enough. That's actually quite a lot. I adjust my coat, pick up my bag, and walk into the city.